Iraq, Iran, and Kuwait. This documentary is on the trail of the Seven Sisters cartel. The investigation leads to Kirkuk in northern Iraq. It's 50 degrees in the shade. There are endless checkpoints and controls. The war has left its mark. In the heart of the Middle East, Iraq, one of the latest battlefields in the Great Oil War. This old American taxi is a gas guzzler, constantly hungry for fuel. The driver seeks out the local petrol peddlers. In oil-rich Iraq, it's not easy filling a tank. Who is responsible for that?
العالم كله يحكي بعراق بالنفط اللي بالعراق. الامريكان جابهم طمعهم اللي جابهم. زين ولا لا جايبين لنا الامان، جايبين لنا المضرم والامان. يعني هاك يطلعون بشارع تبقى وراهم تمشي. زين يطلعون بمكان ما يقدر تصلهم. بس جايتهم مضرم ونفع. زين لا نقول الله لا جابهم ازيد خراب العراق من وراهم.
With multiple attacks and kidnappings, insecurity is rife amongst the derricks and wells. The taxi driver, Ali, calls the route to Kirkuk the road to hell. Oil had previously been found in the Middle East, but never in such quantities. In 1927, it gushed from the ground in Kirkuk. The violence of the discharge caused 5 casualties. Iraq's oil was already wreaking its wrath. But the real story, the secret story of oil, begins elsewhere, in Scotland, in the heart of the Highlands, on August 28, 1928, in Achnacarry Castle. 3 men have an appointment here, a Dutchman, an American, and an Englishman. This pheasant and grouse hunt was never filmed. There are no photos or archive records, but this is probably how it happened. The Dutchman is Henry Detterding, an implacable and determined man, nicknamed the Napoleon of oil. Having exploited a find in Sumatra, he joined forces with a rich ship owner and painted shell salesman. The 2 men founded Royal Dutch Shell. The American is Walter C. Teagle. He represents the Standard Oil Company, founded by John D. Rockefeller at the age of 31, the future Exxon. Wells, transport, refining and distribution, everything is controlled by Standard, an omnipotent, many-headed beast. In 1911, Rockefeller was ordered to dismantle his trust and form 34 separate companies. And yet they all remained under the control of the century's first billionaire. The Englishman, Sir John Cadman, director of the Anglo-Persian Oil Company, soon to become BP. On the initiative of the brilliant young First Lord of the Admiralty, Winston Churchill, the British government took a stake in BP, and the Royal Navy switched from coal to oil. The First World War would validate this decision. With fuel-hungry ships, planes and tanks, oil became the blood of every battle. The new automobile industry was developing fast, and the Ford T was selling by the million. The world was thirsty for oil, and companies were waging a merciless contest. But the competition was making the market unstable. It was time to reach an agreement. Their names are Royal Dutch Shell, Standard Oil, and the Anglo-Persian Oil Company. Today, Shell, Exxon, and BP, the biggest oil companies in the world. Back at the castle, the leading lights of the oil trade are seated, and their secret meeting can begin. Henry Detterding declares, "It is time to exploit, fraternally and to the greatest profit, the world's oil resources. Production zones, transport costs, sale prices, everything must be agreed and shared. In the early hours, an agreement is reached. A secret pact is sealed, but with no signatures. The great oil cartel can prepare to dominate the world.
1928, c'est le moment où, en effet, les compagnies pétrolières, les grandes compagnies pétrolières décident, à travers des accords qui ont lieu à Aknakaré, qui sont des accords informels, un accord d'ailleurs, plutôt pas plusieurs, décident de se partager le monde, les prix, les zones de production, en formant de facto ce qu'on considérera comme un cartel. Et ce qui est très intéressant, c'est que d'abord, évidemment, les pays consommateurs sont tenus dans l'ignorance, les gouvernants des pays consommateurs tout autant, mais également, bien entendu, les pays producteurs. C'est-à-dire que tout ça se fait dans le secret et la moralité la plus totale. Et il faudra attendre non seulement l'après-guerre, mais le début des années 50 pour que le détail de ces accords puisse enfin commencer à filtrer.
On this morning of August 29, 1928, the world order has changed. Other companies would join the billionaires' conspiracy. History will call them the Seven Sisters: Exxon, Shell, BP, Mobil, Texaco, Gulf, and Chevron. The story of the Seven Sisters takes us to Tehran. In the early 20th century, the oil companies fought bitterly here to control Persia's vast oil assets. At the end of the First World War, through the Sykes-Picot agreements, then the Treaty of San Remo, France and Britain divided up the Middle East. The American oil companies were enraged. What could be done? The solution came from an Armenian, Kolaut Gulbenkian, the greatest oil broker of all time. Gulbenkian drew a red line tracing the perimeters of future oil extraction zones, forbidding competition and demanding mutual assistance within the red line area. The Iraq Petroleum Company was created. BP, Shell, Exxon, and the French SFP, the future Total, were equal shareholders. The Seven Sisters controlled the Middle East's known oil reserves. Gulbenkian claimed 5% of every contract.
Les contrats de concession, qui étaient de petits textes d'une quinzaine ou d'une vingtaine de pages, par lesquels ces États concédaient la quasi-totalité de leur territoire. Donc, on imagine l'ignorance dans laquelle ils se trouvaient pour faire quelque chose de pareil. Ces gens-là achetaient des pays entiers, en tout cas les ressources de ces pays, dans des documents qui faisaient 15 à 20 pages.
For the British, the Abadan refinery in Iran was the jewel in the crown, the biggest refinery in the world. The Iranians never had access to the company's accounts. The royalties paid to the Iranian state were negligible, but sufficient to satisfy the reigning monarch, Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi, and buy his silence. The Anglo-Persian was a state within a state, where the law and the lifestyle were consummately British. The Seven Sisters ruled over the Middle East and its oil which had to flow with no interruption towards Europe and the United States.
Delivery of oil to the public is a crucial requirement of any person who wants to remain in office. And one has to understand the importance of oil to the American way of life to understand why politicians see their job as, in large part, if they're in foreign policy, is in procuring adequate supplies of oil to meet American needs. It explains why President Roosevelt, in his last months when he was ailing, felt it necessary to meet with the King of Saudi Arabia, Abdulaziz ibn Saud.
Oil requirements were ever increasing. On his way back from the Yalta Conference on February 14, 1945, President Roosevelt anchored his ship, the USS Quincy, near the Suez Canal. He had a meeting with the King of Arabia, Abdulaziz ibn Saud. Nothing would be signed, but they reconvened an agreement made in 1936, opening the doors of the Kingdom of Arabia to American oil companies. In exchange for the oil, the king demanded protection for his country and gold, a great deal of gold. The kingdom's fortune was sealed by an English adventurer, Harry St. John Philby, a spy, explorer and writer who'd been entrusted, along with a certain Colonel Lawrence, with organizing the Arab Revolt. Having converted to Islam, Philby sided with Ibn Saud against his own country and participated in the creation of the Kingdom of Arabia. In 1936, on his advice, Ibn Saud sold the kingdom's oil rights to the Americans. Aramco was founded, a consortium combining Exxon, Chevron, Mobil, and Texaco.
All these companies like Aramco in the old days, they were a state within the state. Saudi Arabia cannot have a law controlling Aramco. Aramco has the power to produce the oil, to export the oil at the price they decide. Saudi Arabia has no power except to raise their hands to get the money they give them. And this was the relationship.
Arabian oil production began in 1946, shortly after the meeting between Roosevelt and Ibn Saud. 20,000 Americans were billeted to Dhahran in eastern Arabia. In theory, the oil men were merely the king's guests, as no one could purchase the Prophet's holy lands. But in fact, Aramco set the rules for the king, its greatest ally. The American company's only obligation was to shower the king and his 3,000 princes with gold. The desert's oil resources proved to be fabulous, the greatest treasure trove of all time. The United States and Saudi Arabia were wedded, for better or for worse, oil and dollars. Despite the ensuing crises, there has been no divorce.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the red
It was here in Washington in 1952 that the Seven Sisters cartel was summoned to face the Supreme Court for the first time. The Federal Trade Commission was investigating their commercial practices and illicit arrangements. President Harry Truman received a confidential memo from Edgar Hoover, the director of the FBI, but the investigation was blocked. The trial would never take place. What was good for the Seven Sisters was good for America. In Tehran, the bazaar is the heart and pulse of the Iranian capital. It was here in 1951 that the first revolt against British petroleum began. The Bazaris, the middle classes, the Tudor Party communists and Shia religious leaders took to the streets. Their action was triggered by BP's refusal to meet improved wage claims. The workers launched a strike which paralyzed Abadan, the huge oil terminal.
This was absolutely crucial source of wealth to what remained of the British Empire after World War II. And it was also a symbol of white Anglo-Saxon superiority. And the histories of the time make it very clear that for the British, the Iranians were viewed as third-class citizens, as if they were black.
An uprising was sparked. A nationalist MP, Dr. Mohammad Mossadegh, was the movement's leader. In parliament, he was known as Mossadegh al-Saltaneh, a man of proven honesty. His program was simple: nationalize the oil.
بنابراین دکتر مصدق با رادیکالیزمش که چندان هم رادیکال نبود نقطه درستی رو نشان گرفته بود و اونم خلعیت از BP بود در زمینه دارایی‌های نفتی کشور.
Under pressure from Parliament, the Shah appointed Mossadegh Prime Minister. On the very next day, May 1st, 1951, Mossadegh led the vote for the nationalization of Iran's oil. The army occupied the oil fields, but the Iranians were not qualified to keep operations going. 3,000 British technicians and their families left the country, and the British Navy blockaded the ports.
Il y a un branle-bas extraordinaire dans le monde entier. Et les pays occidentaux décrètent que le pétrole iranien est un pétrole rouge. C'est-à-dire celui qui touche le pétrole iranien est traîné devant les tribunaux. Autrement dit, l'Iran ne peut plus vendre son pétrole à quiconque. Et les pétroliers qui quittent les ports iraniens sont saisis.
Iran and Dr. Mossadegh had to be punished. The British Prime Minister Winston Churchill asked the Americans to help. The CIA stepped in. Countless dollars were distributed to pay off members of parliament and leading army officers. The coup d'etat operation was given the codename Ajax. It was coordinated by Kermit Roosevelt, the president's nephew and a CIA agent.
و بعدم چون کودتای نظامی بود، قدرت بود، افسران چپگرا و اعضای حزب توده اعدام شدند، ملیگراها اعدام شدند، به گوشه‌های زندان افتادند، مصدق تبعید شد و وحشت مستولی شد بر سرتاسر تاریخ ایران. کنسرسیوم توانست کار خودش رو جلو ببره.
5,000 of the coup's opponents were shot and killed. Mossadegh was arrested and sentenced to death, a sentence later reduced to exile. On August 24, 1953, the monarch, Reza Shah, returned in triumph. Having organized the coup d'etat, the Americans claimed their reward. BP had to make way for the US companies. Now present in both Iran and Saudi Arabia, the USA controlled two of the planet's biggest black gold producers.
Mais c'est monnaie courante. Le fait que la CIA américaine intervienne en Iran pour remettre les sociétés pétrolières étrangères dans le circuit du pétrole iranien n'a rien d'exceptionnel à l'époque. Les sociétés pétrolières américaines sont tellement puissantes dans certains pays qu'elles se permettent de faire ou de défaire les gouvernements. Ce qui est exceptionnel, c'est d'abord que quelqu'un ait pu lever la tête, en l'occurrence Mossadegh, et que ça se soit traduit par un échec. Là, ça va marquer les esprits pendant plusieurs années. Pendant plusieurs années, personne n'osera plus bouger.
The shockwave created by Mossadegh did move towards Suez, however. Egypt had never benefited from the huge revenues generated by the canal, shared by France and Britain. On July 26, 1956, President Nasser declared the nationalization of the canal. A British, French and Israeli coalition attacked Egypt. Port Said at the entrance to the canal was bombarded and Egyptian forces crushed. Nasser sunk concrete-laden ships in the canal and all traffic was blocked. Under American and Soviet pressure, the Anglo-French forces were forced to withdraw. For Nasser, a military defeat became a political victory. Nasserism and Arab nationalism were born on the banks of the Suez Canal.
La nationalisation du canal de Suez, contrairement à celle du pétrole en Iran, est une réussite. Et là, ça va marquer aussi les esprits. Donc, on peut réussir. Donc, on peut s'opposer aux États occidentaux et, dans certains cas, ça peut se traduire par une réussite.
A political victory for the Arab countries, but an economic victory for the oil companies. The closure of the canal led to a substantial rise in crude oil prices, huge profits for the Seven Sisters. The rise enabled them to pay for the building of a new generation of ships, supertankers. And the Cape of Good Hope became the new maritime route for oil transportation. Baghdad, translatable as the Garden of Peace. For the people of this city, there is neither war nor peace. But worse, a living nightmare every day, a life of uncertainty. It was here on the banks of the Tigris that the Seven Sisters would pay for their sins. Vanity and greed. The sisters were greedy. Despite the havoc caused by the Suez Crisis, Shell and BP decided to cut the buying price of oil by 9% under the pretext of overproduction. It was the Seven Sisters' first mistake. On September 10, 1960, representatives from Venezuela, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Iran, and Kuwait all met in Baghdad. After 4 days of discussion, they agreed to found OPEC, the Organization of Petrol Exporting Countries. Their objective, to collectively fix the sale price of their oil.
Toutes les décisions vont être suivies à la loupe parce que ça impacte, ça a une influence sur une matière, sur le prix d'une matière qui est essentielle pour les économies modernes.
Well, the Western countries did not really feel that this little organization will be powerful. So they ignore it. The oil companies also, being very powerful, they ignored it. Not only this, they refuse to mention the word OPEC. And I know for sure that America was working very hard to convince some countries in the Gulf not to join this, including Saudi Arabia.
This is the story of the Seven Sisters Cartel, a group of companies that dominate the world's petroleum industry. Exxon, Shell, BP, Mobil, Texaco, Gulf, and Chevron. It began with a secret meeting between 3 top oil traders back in 1928 and a secret pact to start exploiting the world's oil resources. In 1960, after decades of exploitation, oil-producing countries came together to form the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, or OPEC, and collectively fix the price of their oil. The creation of OPEC was greeted in the West with indifference, skepticism, and scorn. The Washington Post wrote, OPEC, a belligerent conglomerate of camel-riding emirates. The West's overt contempt disgruntled the new leader in Iraq, Saddam Hussein. On June 1st, 1972, without any notice, he nationalized the Iraq Petroleum Company. It put an end to the concession regimes which had handed over Iraq's oil to the majors for some 50 years.
Lorsqu'en 1972, l'Irak a nationalisé le consortium pétrolier, l'IPC, Iraq Petroleum Corporation, on s'est rendu compte tout à coup que les dirigeants de cette société, à part quelques dizaines d'Occidentaux, c'était déjà les Irakiens. Les techniciens étaient irakiens, les ingénieurs étaient irakiens, il y avait des économistes irakiens. Donc la nationalisation par l'Irak de son pétrole a été une nationalisation réelle.
American majors were furious. Foreseeing this, Saddam Hussein called on the Soviet Union. Moscow supplied technical and military support. Then he turned to the French. France needed oil. Iraq, arms. The deal was a foregone conclusion. Arab oil nationalization and the creation of OPEC. This time, the Seven Sisters' power seemed to be severely undermined. Strangely enough, the Arab-Israeli conflict would serve the Seven Sisters' cause. In the midst of the Jewish Yom Kippur holiday, the Day of Atonement, in October 1973, Egypt and Syria attacked Israel. The surprise was total, and the Israeli defense lines were overcome. The fourth Arab-Israeli conflict had begun.
Il est certain que le drame israélo-palestinien est un alibi, c'est même peut-être une chance pour le reste du monde, consommateur de l'énergie du Moyen-Orient, car tant que, en raison du drame israélo-palestinien, les pays de la région restent divisés, ils se privent des moyens d'imposer leur stratégie et d'imposer des prix du pétrole qui feraient d'eux les plus riches du monde.
Armed and equipped by the United States and empowered by their aerial supremacy, the Israelis' counter-offensive was victorious. As a reprisal to the American support, Arab members of OPEC decided on a series of price rises. OPEC emerged from the shadows of scorn and indifference. After the nationalization of oil in Iraq, Iran, Libya, and Algeria, OPEC covered 70% of the world's oil. It announced a complete embargo against the United States and Holland, and it also embargoed shipments to Rotterdam, a major oil terminal.
We, according to our philosophy, we don't use oil as a penalty, a punishment, but as a political instrument to attract the attention that there is a problem between the Arabs and the Israelis. Some other oil producers within OPEC, they wanted to punish America.
In Washington in 1973, a wind of panic was blowing. Automobiles ground to a halt, and the world turned in slow motion.
In recent months, we have taken many actions to increase supplies and to reduce consumption. But even with our best efforts, we knew that a period of temporary shortages was inevitable. Unfortunately, our expectations for this winter have now been sharply altered by the recent conflict in the Middle East.
Strengthened by the capacity of their stocks and the staggering cost of a barrel, the Seven Sisters could boast colossal profits. Exxon doubled its revenues.
I was against increasing the price of oil, and they attacked me for that. But I knew for sure that very high prices will have a reaction. The reaction happened, but you don't come to oil producers who can make a lot of money and tell them, no, don't make a lot of money. They don't consider the strategy. Strategy, because when you raise the price of oil, you enable the oil companies to use the extra money to explore for oil. And this is what happened in the North Sea, in Mexico, and elsewhere. So the level of production outside OPEC took place, competing with the price of OPEC.
OPEC thought it had won the battle, but in fact, it had lost the war. The 1973 oil crisis was a gigantic manipulation. The Seven Sisters needed money, huge sums, to finally prepare for drilling the offshore zones in the North Sea. The Yom Kippur War, OPEC's embargo, and the rise in prices all benefited the Seven Sisters. The Arab countries were playing their enemy's game. In 1975, the Shah of Iran was the key player in the global oil game. Saudi Arabia was too weak, Iraq too threatening. And so with Nixon's blessing, the Shah became the Gulf's gendarme.
And the Shah of Iran became an American puppet rather than a British puppet. In addition to the diplomatic and public face of U.S. support for the Shah, the U.S. also provided him with military assistance and assistance to his police forces and the secret police, SAVAK, the secret police of the Shah. And it was the secret police that was implicated in the repression and the slaughter of the Shiite clergy and other dissident groups inside Iran.
In exile in France, in Nofle-le-Château, the Shah's fiercest opponent, Ayatollah Khomeini, made a solemn appeal for resistance. A strike in the oil sector, he said, is an act of obedience to God. His message was heard. Not a single drop of oil was extracted. The people were in the streets, and the Shah's days were numbered.
2 mois après les grèves dans l'industrie pétrolière iranienne, les ouvriers ont décrété l'arrêt total de la production de pétrole en Iran. Et je me souviens de la déclaration que les Américains ont faite quelques jours plus tard, où ils disaient à peu près ceci: nous savons maintenant qu'avec le Shah d'Iran, on n'aura pas une reprise de la production pétrolière. Pour tout le monde, c'était clair. Le sort du Shah avait été scellé. Le pétrole qui avait renversé Mossadegh se préparait à renverser le Shah.
The Americans and their oil companies turned their backs on the emperor. Turmoil was not good for business. Sick and broken, the monarch left Iran. Only the Egyptian president Anwar al-Sadat deigned to receive him. Reza Shah would only be authorized to enter the United States 1 year later, to die of cancer. Ayatollah Khomeini returned to Tehran in triumph. The West believed it could cope with the change in regime. Religious authority was better than communism. The USSR was far too close to Iran, but the Americans severely underestimated the new Shia government's anger and resentment. At congregational prayers on Friday, the same slogans can be heard as at the time of the Ayatollah more than 30 years ago. In 1979, for America, the oil companies, and the Sunni Arab world, Iraq was the new ally. The secular regime in Baghdad was a shield against the Iranian Shia fundamentalists. In 1981, Saddam Hussein invaded Iran with everyone's blessing. The second oil crisis began, and the war was a sinister godsend for the Seven Sisters. The price of crude oil skyrocketed. For both the companies and the producing countries, petrodollars rained down in abundance.
So in the chaos of this moment of the Iranian Revolution in 1980, Saddam Hussein invaded Iran. And I believe his intention was to seize the southwestern part of the country where most of Iran's oil fields are located. He was somewhat successful at first, but then the Iranian Revolution mobilized young people, the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, and drove Saddam Hussein out of Iran and began to press into Iraq itself. And this caused a great deal of anxiety in the West, in Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, which began to fear the success of the Iranians, who were Shiites. And so they began supporting Saddam Hussein.
8 years of war took a heavy toll. More than 1 million casualties and extensive oil facilities destroyed on both sides.
On a fait la guerre d'Iran-Irak. Je dis on a fait la guerre parce qu'il fallait utiliser un pays pour détruire l'autre. Comme ils sont déjà bénéficiaires de la manne pétrolière et qu'ils accumulent des réserves financières, il faut de temps en temps les saigner.
The return of peace raised a question for the majors. Could peace lead to overproduction? The answer came from Kuwait. The emirate increased its own production by 20%. Oil prices fell immediately. In addition, the emir refused to cancel the $15 billion debt contracted by Iraq. Saddam felt betrayed by his former allies, who had all profited from the conflict.
The major country which really kept overproducing and kind of assumed some intransigent mode was Kuwait. And that what really pressured Saddam, because he really needed the money. Every time the price went $1 down, Iraq would lose $1 billion.
This was too much for Saddam Hussein, who informed the United States ambassador April Glaspie of his intention to send military forces into Kuwait. She replied that this was an internal matter between two neighboring countries. The dictator was led to believe the US would not intervene. On August 2nd, 1990, Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait.
And so only a short period after meeting the American ambassador, Iraq invaded Kuwait. And if you ask me, was this a trap? I would say yes. Saddam fell into that trap 100%.
The net around Saddam was tightening. It was unthinkable for the American administration to allow the Iraqi dictator to confiscate Kuwait's oil. In 1991, in just a few days, the Iraqi forces were crushed.
As Commander-in-Chief, I can report to you our armed forces fought with honor and valor. And as President, I can report to the nation, aggression is defeated, the war is over.
But the New World Order sought by President Bush began in a raging inferno. It would take 9 months to extinguish the fires at some 750 wells sabotaged by the Iraqi troops.
Le Koweït est depuis toujours la chasse gardée de, je dirais, de la famille Bush. Parce qu'il faut souligner que George Bush, donc le père, le président à l'époque, a fait sa fortune à travers sa société pétrolière qui s'appelle Zapata, en obtenant les droits d'exploitation, justement des gisements offshore au Koweït dans l'après-guerre.
At the beginning of the 20th century, this stretch of sand seized by Iraqi tribesmen lived under the protection of the British Empire. A small pearl fishing port that served the British Navy en route to India. In 1938, oil flowed from the Kuwaiti desert. The tiny emirate, a mere patch of sand, proved to be a veritable oil sponge. American and British companies exploited this desert treasure and made fortunes for themselves, for the emir and his subjects.
It was like an earthquake. It changed the whole face of Kuwait society. All of a sudden, we were in the press. All of a sudden, we were the biggest oil producer in the world. All of a sudden, we have the wealth. and from basically very basic living standard, barely, having food or barely having proper clothes, and all of a sudden here we are. The doors of heaven open to us.
In January 2001, George W. Bush's Vice President, Dick Cheney, launched an energy policy development group, the Energy Task Force. The aims of this commission were surrounded in absolute secrecy. For the Washington Post, it was a secret society. More than ever, the American administration appeared to be an extension of the oil lobby. Dick Cheney, a former president of Halliburton, Condoleezza Rice, a former executive with Chevron, all committed to the oil company's cause.
En 2003, la Commission est tout de même contrainte, par un jugement d'une cour d'appel fédérale américaine, de divulguer plusieurs documents. Et un des documents était très intéressant. C'est en effet donc une carte de l'Irak qui découpe toute la partie proche de l'Arabie Saoudite, toute la partie de l'Irak proche de l'Arabie Saoudite, en 8 zones d'exploitation pétrolifère. Donc c'est dire que le pétrole était au cœur, en effet, des pensées, des réflexions et des stratégies, bien sûr, de cette administration. Le pétrole et l'Irak.
The September 11th attacks to the heart of the American dream unleash unprecedented violence. Terrorism, weapons of mass destruction. The 9/11 tragedy is a long-awaited pretext. With the world's second-largest oil reserves, Iraq is designated as a response to America's energy requirements.
Iraq continues to flaunt its hostility toward America and to support terror. The Iraqi regime has plotted to develop anthrax and nerve gas and nuclear weapons for over a decade. States like these and their terrorist allies constitute an axis of evil, arming to threaten the peace of the world.
This is a city in ruin. The calm waters of the Tigris form the horizon line from the Al Mansour Hotel.
Ships in the Gulf. A big explosion less than a mile from our hotel that followed this, the first hit on a government...
From these balconies, the world witnessed the American raids on the capital on television, when bombs hurled by invisible aircraft seemed to raise the city into the skies. On March 20th, 2003, the Second Gulf War had just begun. In less than 3 weeks, the Abrams tanks leading Operation Iraqi Freedom reached the outskirts of Baghdad. The US troops' first mission was to secure the oil wells.
Les premières directives qui avaient été données aux responsables militaires étaient de sécuriser justement les installations pétrolières. Ça, c'était la priorité qui leur avait été conférée, donnée, et de sécuriser le ministère du pétrole à Bagdad. Peu après, donc, le renversement de Saddam Hussein et l'intervention militaire, l'entrée dans Bagdad des troupes américaines, les ministères étaient tous pillés et on pouvait constater, observer au ministère du pétrole des blindés l'entourant avec les marines placées en grande quantité tout autour et formant un cordon sanitaire. Et jamais ce ministère n'a été, en effet, approché, touché et encore moins, bien entendu, saccagé par les manifestants.
10 years after the end of the war, the city still seems to be under siege. In Paradise Square, a new statue symbolizes the newfound freedom. It stands on the same base as the statue of Saddam Hussein that was pulled down on April 9th, 2003. Was it the toppling of a dictator, or simply a war for oil?
That in the minds of Dick Cheney and George Bush and the others, this was a coincidence of interests, a convergence of interests, that a strategic advantage would be accomplished by eliminating Saddam Hussein and putting a pro-American regime in power in Iraq. And at the same time, that would make available the oil fields of Iraq for exploitation by American companies.
The Americans claim to be introducing a new world order in the Middle East and winning the so-called war on terror. NGOs, for their part, report more than 120,000 civilian victims. Chaos ruled. The Sunnis, the Shias, the Kurds. The war in Iraq continued among sectarian militia. In reality, the American invasion, with its whiff of petrol, merely spread the stench of death.
One says that Iraq is the oil El Dorado. Well, this is indeed true. So it is really the last frontier, let us say. It is the last province that can be open one day to international oil companies, and they come and they find these supergiant fields, which are no more in the rest of the world.
Chinese, Russian, American, more than 150 companies jostle for position. And the stakes are high. Iraq's oil fields, the world's second biggest oil reserves. In 2009, contracts were signed, and the oil fields of West Qurna, Maju and Rumaila were attributed to ExxonMobil, Shell and BP. The Seven Sisters are very much present. Once again, they come out on top. Since the notorious hunting party at Aknakari Castle, they have never ceased to plot, to plan and to scheme. Basically, to manipulate the course of world history. To the sound of the waves of the Gulf of Guinea, we begin our journey in the Black El Dorado. At the end of the 1960s, the Seven Sisters, the major oil companies, controlled 85% of the world's oil reserves. Today, they control just 10%. New hunting grounds are therefore required, and the predators are turning their gaze towards Africa. With peak oil, Middle East wars and the rise in crude prices, Africa is the oil company's new battleground.
When the Western world was developing its agriculture and basic industry, they needed an energy source, and that was human energy. And slaves were taken from Nigeria, from Africa. And now it's crude oil. So from the blood in the veins of the slaves, of Africans, from the palm oil, and now crude oil, it is one story of exploitation from one level to another. And honestly, this has to stop.
But the real story, the secret story of oil, begins far from Africa. In Scotland, in the heart of the Highlands, at Aknakari Castle on August 28, 1928. Under the pretext of a hunting party, 3 men have an appointment here. A Dutchman, an American, and an Englishman. This pheasant and grouse hunt was never filmed. There are no photos or archive records. But this is possibly how it happened. The Dutchman is Henry Detterding, an implacable and determined man nicknamed the Napoleon of oil. He runs the all-powerful Royal Dutch Shell. The American is Walter C. Teagle. He represents the Standard Oil Company, founded by John D. Rockefeller at the age of 31, the future Exxon. The Englishman, Sir John Cadman, director of the Anglo-Persian Oil Company, soon to become BP. At the castle, the leading lights of the oil trade are seated, and their secret meeting can begin. The world needs oil, and the companies are engaged in a pitiless battle. War is perhaps good for business, but competition is not. Henry Detterding declares, "It is time to exploit, fraternally and to the greatest profit, the world's oil resources, production zones, transport costs, sales prices. Everything must be agreed and shared." A secret pact is sealed, but with no signatures. The great oil cartel can prepare to dominate the world.
The Seven Sisters, 7 companies, dominated the petroleum industry at the time that the petroleum industry didn't just mean economic prowess and power. It was really an instrument of American and European, call it Western, projection of power in the third world. That's what the Seven Sisters were supposed to be.
On this morning of August 29, 1928, the world order has changed. Other companies will join the billionaires' conspiracy. History will call them the Seven Sisters: Exxon, Shell, BP, Mobil, Texaco, Gulf, and Chevron. Minarets and flare stacks vie for supremacy in the Libyan skies. The burning desert, once scornfully dubbed the sandpit. In 1955, oil sprung from the dunes here, regarded by the oilmen as the best in the world. At the end of World War II, under pressure from the American oil companies, Great Britain and the United Nations installed Idris el-Senussi on Libya's throne.
In 1959, we discovered first well. It was Libya. Oil was, as a matter of fact, the whole oil industry in Libya was an American oil industry. Because Esso, in that time, find the first oil well, was the first to export oil, and was the first to produce it. In less than 3 years, Libya started producing more than 1 million. And in less than 7 years, Libya reached 3.5 million barrels a day. It was a phenomenon.
The Kingdom of Libya was an oil paradise for the American majors. The accounting was creative, to the extent that Libya received just 12 cents per barrel. As President Nixon and his advisors said in 1968, King Idris's regime was stable and secure because it was corrupt, truly corrupt. The tankers laden with the finest quality black gold could therefore sail unheeded towards the American coast. Well before the majors, a French geologist, Conrad Killian, knew about the potential of Libya's oil fields. He spoke of himself as a man who speaks to stones. After 2 expeditions in the 20s, he confirmed that oil existed in the Sahara and Libyan Fezzan. He was the only man in the world with a map of the Sahara's potential oil reserves. In February 1941, General Erwin Rommel arrived in Tripoli at the head of the Afrika Korps. The same day, he sent his tanks against the British positions, driving them back as far as Egypt. His campaign plan was simple: to open up the access to the Middle East oil fields, and then to join up with German forces from the east, who were supposed to capture Baku and its fabulous reserves. The war in the North African deserts was a battle for oil.
And they were talking about that there is oil in Libya, and as an irony, Italy and Germany were fighting the Allies, and then suffering from the shortage of oil, while beneath their feet there is a huge reserves of oil. And they lost the war because of the shortage of oil.
Back in France, Killian attempted to convince his government his finds were authentic. But only the British Secret Service seemed interested, perhaps too interested.
C'est là que j'ai eu le spectacle de M. Killian qui s'était pendu à l'espagnolette. Disons qu'il avait la tête à cette hauteur, le buste qui pendait, les jambes en avant.
Killian was found hanged in a seedy hotel room in Grenoble on April 29, 1950, suspended from a window latch 120 centimeters off the ground. He was 185 centimeters tall. Despite signs of blows, the verdict was suicide. In the aftermath of World War II, France is rebuilding. Dominated by the Anglo-Saxon corporations, it has to gain energy independence. It therefore turns to its colonial empire. A handful of geologists, perhaps remembering Killian, took the wild risk of searching in the Algerian Sahara, a desert bigger than France itself. Men from CFP and ERAP, the forerunners of Total and ELF, began the long search.
Pour les Français, pour la stratégie pétrolière française, il était important de trouver du pétrole dans l'Empire français, dans les colonies françaises ou dans les ex-colonies françaises, parce que c'était du pétrole payable en francs. Et donc, une fois l'indépendance achevée dans les pays africains, il reste dans la zone franc, et donc c'est important d'avoir du pétrole payable en francs français.
After 4 years of fruitless drilling, oil finally sprung on June 16, 1956, at Hassi Messaoud. 3,000 meters underground lay one of the biggest oil fields in the world. On that June day, France became a major oil producer.
En 1954, il y a déjà la guerre de libération qui a été déclenchée et la question pétrolière va amener le gouvernement français à revoir sa stratégie vis-à-vis de la guerre d'Algérie, tout simplement.
L'Algérie a fait des obsèques solennelles aux victimes de la vague d'attentats.
The attacks and riots, euphemistically called the events of Algeria, turned into the Algerian War, a war for independence. Curiously, the war seemed not to affect the Sahara. Foreign Legion troops camped close to the oil wells, but the FLN and Algerian rebels made no real attempt to sabotage the wells or the pipelines, as if wishing to preserve their future inheritance and spoils of war.
La découverte du pétrole va modifier la géographie même du pays, tant et si bien qu'il y a même eu une proposition du gouvernement français qui a été faite au FLN en 1957, dans laquelle il était proposé que le Sahara continue à être territoire français et qu'il y ait un couloir large d'un certain nombre de quelques kilomètres entre Hassi Messaoud et Béjaïa, dans lequel seraient posés tous les pipelines d'évacuation du pétrole vers le nord. Et les parties à l'est et à l'ouest de ce couloir devaient constituer l'Algérie indépendante.
The oil issue and France's proposal to separate the Sahara from Algeria plagued every attempt to find a peaceful solution. Oil from the Sahara fed France and Europe, and the war raged on for 4 long years. Talks were finally initiated between France and the FLN in Evian, and an agreement was signed on March 18, 1962. Algeria obtained full sovereignty over the Sahara and its riches, in exchange for certain guarantees concerning French oil supplies. In the heart of the desert is Hassi Messaoud. With its 1,500 inhabitants, a chapel, a gendarme post, bakery, post office and swimming pool, no expense is spared on the new capital of French oil. Oleander bushes, palm trees and eucalyptus grow alongside the 300 wells. 14 million tons of oil are produced here, and the flare stacks light up the desert night. Despite independence, Hassi Messaoud remains a French enclave, exploited by French companies. Profits are enormous, and the party is in full swing. But it's the last one. The Algerian president Boumediene turns off the music.
قررنا ابتداء من هذا اليوم باش على كل حال الثورة الاشتراكية تدخل في قطاع اللي هو كان قطاع خاص يعني حتى واحد ما يمسه وهو القطاع البترولي. قررنا تأميم النقل البري يعني كل الأنابيب اللي هي خارجة من الآبار هذه تصبح ملك بتاع الدولة.
On the morning of January 24th, 1971, France wakes up with a hangover. The Algerian president has dared to commit the unthinkable. For the first time in history, Algeria's oil is nationalized. Unlike Total, which accepted the new conditions, ELF abandoned Algeria. But France had to organize its oil future. Two men emerged from the wings. A former Gaullist Secret Service agent, Pierre Guillaume, director of ELF, and Jacques Foccart, a friend of General de Gaulle and an advisor on African affairs. Their mission is clear: to find oil in Africa and ensure France's energy self-sufficiency. The adventure began here in Gabon in 1956. In the marshy delta of Port-Gentil, where the river Ogooué flows among mahogany and ebony forests. The first prospectors discovered oil at Azuri and Point Claret. 1 year later, the tanker Le Ronsard left the Cap Lopez terminal and set sail for Le Havre. Gabon became a protectorate of the French Republic, run by Jacques Foccart and ELF in collusion with President Omar Bongo. ELF defined its own diplomatic relations with the blessing of the French government. Gabon without France is like a car with no driver. France without Gabon is like a car with no fuel. Bongo reportedly repeated that as a friend to France and all its presidents.
C'est ELF, avec la France-Afrique, qui ont imposé Bongo au Gabon pendant 40 ans. Ce n'est secret pour personne. Pour travailler tranquille. Et qui a bénéficié de ces largesses, la largesse de ELF? Ben, c'est Bongo et sa famille. C'est clair, ce n'est pas la population. Je ne trouve pas d'excuses, je ne trouve pas de raisons. Je ne trouve pas de justificatifs pour ne pas qualifier ce qui s'est passé au Gabon particulièrement, pour ne pas le qualifier de génocide économique entre les multinationales et les dirigeants gabonais imposés par les mêmes multinationales.
But it didn't stop there. ELF extended its influence to a large part of Black Africa, giving birth to what would be known as Francafrique. Nigeria, Chad, the Congo, Cameroon, Angola. ELF would fund a variety of regimes and guerrilla movements. A pragmatic diplomacy where slush funds flowed in every oil-producing country on the continent. With bribes and embezzlement, ELF made fortunes for its executives and a few African leaders.
En dégageant plusieurs milliards de francs de caisses noires, les satrapes africains et les dirigeants d'ELF ont fait bien plus que de détourner de l'argent. Ils ont créé du malheur. C'est l'Afrique qui a financé une grande partie de la vie politique française, mais dans l'affaire ELF, ce financement représentait quelques pourcents. Le gros des détournements a fait la fortune des cadres d'ELF et de leurs amis.
Sea, sand, and the African sun. The daily life of the oil expatriate seems leisurely. But in a country of barely 1 million inhabitants, the daunting dependence on oil makes daily life difficult. The tomatoes come from South Africa, and the potatoes from Paris. The state goes begging to the IMF. The oil money is gone, evaporated. The party is over. After 8 years, thousands of hearings and statements, the Elf affair is concluded. The verdict falls in November 2003. Loic Laflaque-Prigent, former CEO, André Tellaro, the Corsican-born Monsieur Africa, and Alfred Sirven, the special ops man, extradited from the Philippines. All three are sentenced to prison. For its crimes, Elf is bought by Total. The French company joins the Seven Sisters private club. Libya, September 1st, 1969. With King Idris absent for medical treatment, a group of officers staged a coup d'etat, and Muammar Gaddafi proclaimed a new Libyan Arab Republic. He was just 27 years old. For the Seven Sisters, the wind of change ushered in by Colonel Gaddafi would soon attain hurricane proportions. In 1970, he nationalized Libyan oil and, against all expectations, raised the price of a barrel by 30%. In just a few months, the Seven Sisters were facing a serious enemy.
Gaddafi gave a speech in the opening of the discussion. And he said one important word or sentence. He said, Libya lived 5,000 years without oil, and it is ready to live another 5,000 years without it. That was a big, big blow. The oil companies found out that we were serious. And to prove this, we cut the production from oil companies.
Off the coast of Tripoli in the Gulf of Gades lies the Bouri oil field. It's the largest in the Mediterranean. Gaddafi needed money to pay for his revolution. Oil would supply it. He also funded freedom movements around the world. Oil money would support the fight against imperialism and the Palestinians' cause. In 1982, the United States decrees a commercial embargo against Libya. Regularly renewed and intensified, that embargo would last until 2004 and seriously penalize the Libyan oil industry.
I think we could fairly say Libya was enemy number one of the major producing companies, especially the American companies. And one of the accusations against the country, especially in the 70s and the 80s, was that Gaddafi, armed with so much money from the oil revenue, is actually spreading terrorism around the world.
Along the Costa Esmeralda is the town of Olbia, where the turquoise waters are studded with luxury yachts. It's here that we find His Excellency, Sheikh Zaki Yamani, one of the most emblematic figures in Arab oil history.
I was against raising the price of oil so quickly because it was against the interest of the Arabs and the oil producers. Maybe this is my crime. I don't know.
On December 21st, 1975, a group of 6 gunmen entered the OPEC headquarters in Vienna. 11 ministers and dozens of their colleagues were taken hostage. Their mission was to assassinate the Saudi oil minister, Sheikh Yamani. Leading the commandos was a Venezuelan, Ilich Ramirez Sanchez, known as Carlos.
Carlos and me, we were talking, joking, and so on. I mean, he was very kind to me, but he told me that he's going to kill me.
The commandos demanded a plane to fly to Algiers and then Tripoli. Gaddafi refused to accept them, and the hostages were finally released in Algiers.
Some people said because they want to kill Sheikh Yamani because Sheikh Yamani was in the hands of the Americans and they play for their interest and cutting the price down and increasing the production and helping IEA to build a big stocks to affect the oil price. Yamani, some people think that he worked completely against the interest of the Arab people and of Palestine and of OPEC. But if these people, but nothing happened to Sheikh Yamani. Sheikh Yamani was released and nothing happened to him.
Was there a deal? Sheikh Yamani will not say. In his prison cell, Carlos stated that Gaddafi was the instigator of the hostage-taking. We leave the Sheikh and head for Sudan on the Red Sea. There too, oil has fueled war. This is the story of the Seven Sisters Cartel, a group of companies that dominate the world's petroleum industry. Exxon, Shell, BP, Mobil, Texaco, Gulf, and Chevron. It began with a secret meeting between 3 top oil traders back in 1928 and a secret pact to start exploiting the world's oil resources. When Sudan became independent in 1956, the Arab elite in the north seized power in Khartoum. The southern regions were marginalized. The black African peoples in the south, Christians and animists, claimed autonomy for their region. And so began a civil war that would last almost 20 years.
Tout le monde pensait qu'il pouvait y avoir du pétrole au Soudan. Personne n'en savait rien. Ça a été révélé par l'exploration de la compagnie américaine Chevron à la fin des années 70. Et ça a été le début de la Deuxième Guerre civile qui ensuite a duré jusqu'en 2002. Ça a duré 19 années. Et cette guerre civile a coûté au moins 1,5 million de morts. Donc l'affaire pétrolière est au cœur de la situation.
Blood and oil. Officially, Sudan has the 5th largest oil reserves on the African continent, but the majority of the oil fields are in the south. For Khartoum, war was inevitable, with its plague of horrors and massacres. The authorities in Khartoum were accused of genocide and crimes against humanity. In this context, the Chinese stepped in.
In this competition between the United States and China, it is often claimed that China behaves by different rules than by the United States and the Europeans. They don't have the NGOs scrutinizing their behavior, and they're not as much concerned by human rights. So in places like Sudan, they've developed a close relationship with President al-Bashir, who has been implicated with massive human rights violations.
Sudanese oil is vital for China's growth, and China has been generous to the Sudanese president, Omar al-Bashir. As a benefactor, China is an interested party. It's a strategy with few scruples, just another way of doing business.
也就是说，我们经常强调的这种人权观里边，其中一个发展观，这是我们经常强调的。就是说，如果这个区域或这个国家它没有经济发展，谈什么权利啊？首先，经济发展起来以后，那么，这是一个最基本的。如果连生存发展权都没有，那你谈其他的这东西就是比较有点像比较虚幻啊。
The Chinese builders move in. President al-Bashir can be proud of his cooperation with China. A dam on the Nile, roads and stadiums. In order to export 500,000 barrels a day from the oil fields in the south, China financed and built the Hejlij Port Sudan pipeline. South Sudan's oil is shipped to the Middle Empire's ports.
les Chinois ont amené des esclaves. Alors ça a été une opération assez étonnante. Plus de 25 000 travailleurs qui étaient des condamnés à des peines de droit commun, qu'on a extraits des prisons chinoises, qu'on a amenés au Soudan, et on leur a dit, voilà les gars, voilà des pelles et des pioches, au boulot.
In a dramatic shift after 50 years of civil war, the unthinkable happens on a February morning in 2010. By a huge majority, Southern Sudan obtains its independence. A new country is born. How will the oil revenues be shared out between the two Sudans? The question would spark off further conflict. The Western companies, the Seven Sisters, would re-enter the stage. But the Chinese are already well established.
Le Sud a 85% du pétrole, mais la seule voie d'évacuation de ce pétrole pour l'exportation vers l'étranger, c'est au Nord. Donc le Nord a le robinet, même si la source est au Sud.
Back in Gabon, in the shadow of the Cap Lopez oil terminal, the African night is balmy. It's a new three-handed game. The Majors and the Seven Sisters are not alone here. The Chinese like Africa and show it. $10 billion in investments and loans over the next 3 years. Gabon needs a lot of money. The Seven Sisters have their work cut out.
Quand l'État convoque les compagnies pétrolières, c'est pour leur dire, écoutez, nous sommes encore, on a besoin d'argent, essayez de nous avancer de l'argent, point. Aujourd'hui, l'État gabonais est presque sous perfusion. Ce sont ces multinationales qui injectent l'argent dans les caisses de l'État. C'est-à-dire, on peut même dire que le pétrole gabonais est hypothéqué.
Point plié, s'il vous plaît. Point droit plié. Point droit plié. Ensemble, unis dans la concorde.
A strike by workers at Total. Protests are organized at the Cap Lopez terminal, but there are few illusions. No one can defy the oil giant on its own ground.
À chaque fois qu'il y a des mouvements à Port-Gentil, mais c'est l'armée française qui va mettre de l'ordre. Vous voyez, toute cette répression, vous avez la pression militaire, la répression et des techniques de corruption généralisées qui font en sorte que même quand la population veut se lever, ça ne marche pas.
It's impossible to sail around Port-Gentil without running into the French army. Boarding today is relatively courteous. The Navy's 6th Infantry Battalion is in charge of the installation's security. Their motto is, "In the name of God and the colonial troops." Life insurance for the Gabonese regime and the oil facilities. In this Gabonese El Dorado, where Bongo Jr. succeeds Bongo Sr., with the oil company's blessing, all that's left is a precarious well-being. Everything else has been stolen. On the western flank of Africa lies the Gulf of Guinea. In the past 20 years, oil production has doubled here, a new El Dorado.
On the 500 Naira Nigerian Naira notes, you find an oil platform, an oil rig, where the money for the prosperity of Nigeria has come for the past 50 years. But today, the people of Nigeria, the people of Niger Delta in particular, have no benefit from the resources from this oil that has produced this Niger. This is the heart of the crisis of Nigeria.
The center of the crisis here could be Makoko, a lakeside shanty town in Lagos. With makeshift houses on fragile stilts, it's the last refuge of outcasts, excluded from oil benefits. They squeeze into the slums of Africa's biggest metropolis, Lagos. The air is rife with the rank smell of cooking fires and foul, stagnant water. The stench of poverty. As always, it's a magnificent adventure. In the hostile jungle, men build iron cathedrals, delve into the entrails of the earth, and the first flare stacks spit out their fetid breath towards the heavens. In 1956, Shell opened up the flood of Nigerian oil, the country being a protectorate of the British Crown. The first tanker loads of oil headed for Europe, as had palm oil and cocoa before it, and long ago, slaves for plantations in the New World.
So quite frankly, the relationship between the Nigerian people, particularly those who call themselves leaders, and the oil company, the five major, is that of master-servant relationship. The oil company are the masters in Nigeria. The Nigerian people are now the servant to the oil company. It's a tragedy.
Le Biafra, qui a été le premier grand conflit qui s'est produit après les indépendances sur le continent africain, était un conflit instrumentalisé par des puissances occidentales qui souhaitaient tout simplement s'accaparer les terres à pétrole du Nigeria. Les Igbo ont été soutenus par de nombreux pays occidentaux, la France en premier lieu, qui cherchait à l'époque à mettre pied sur ces terres à pétrole. Elle s'est soldée par la mort de plus d'1 million de personnes.
On May 26, 1967, the region of the Christian and animist Igbos voted for independence from the central government, controlled by Muslims in the north. The Republic of Biafra was declared, triggering an appalling and murderous civil war. The new Biafra held 2/3 of Nigerian oil reserves. De Gaulle and Elf provided arms. It was one way of weakening the influence of the British companies, BP and Shell.
Elf a perdu la guerre du Biafra et c'est les compagnies britanniques qui l'ont emporté. C'est les compagnies britanniques qui ont emporté, c'est BP et Shell.
Africa's leading oil producer, Nigeria, is known as the African elephant. With 35 states, 250 ethnic groups, and over 160 million inhabitants, more than half the population attempt to survive on less than $1 a day. In Lagos, the former capital in the south, Christian churches abound, with Pentecostals, Baptists, and Adventists seeking to relieve both souls and pockets of rich and poor alike. Many here have another, more derogatory name for the black gold.
I disorganize them and uproot them in the name of Jesus.
Well, if it is the seed of God, I don't know that God that would, inflict that sort of harm on its own people.
The Niger Delta, 7,000 kilometers of oil pipelines, 1,500 wells, tons of leaking oil burning the mangrove and men's skin. Massive pollution, bravely denounced, but in vain.
Les Ogoni sont un peuple de pêcheurs qui ont toujours vécu dans la mangrove et qui finalement tiraient leurs ressources des ressources halieutiques du delta du Niger. Le jour où Ken Saro-Wiwa a constaté que les criques commençaient à être polluées, qu'il y avait de plus en plus de pipes d'oléoducs qui fuyaient et crachaient leur merde du diable dans les criques poissonneuses de cette deuxième mangrove au monde, qu'est le delta du Niger, Ken Saro-Wiwa s'est lancé en lutte.
Ken Saro-Wiwa, an Ogoni, denounced the collusion between Shell and General Abacha's dictatorship. He accused the oil company of polluting the environment and not sharing its staggering revenues with the local population. He succeeded in mobilizing thousands of people, and the pressure forced Shell to stop production. On the company's request, the demonstrators were violently repressed by the police and the Nigerian army. There were hundreds of fatalities. Ken Saro-Wiwa was arrested and sentenced to death. On November 10, 1995, in Port Harcourt, Ken Saro-Wiwa was hanged, along with 8 of his comrades.
Everyone knows that Shell Petroleum Development Company was complicit in the murder of Ken Saro-Wiwa. They were complicit because they, for the most part, instigated a lot of the crisis, which ultimately led to the arrests, trial, and hanging of Ken Saro-Wiwa.
A rough trail, built by Shell to transport its workers, leads out of Port Harcourt and to Shell's facilities in the Delta. Filming is forbidden and there are frequent army roadblocks. In a country making millions, the water is undrinkable, the land unworkable, and the air unbreathable.
Now we are not having a benefit. Oil is coming from our land, and the benefit is not given to us. Police, the army are employed by the oil company to defend them. It's not we. Even if when we go to lay our complaint, they will drive us. Even when we are annoyed and block their way, the army will come. Sometimes they lock our children.
And so emerged the movement for the emancipation of the Niger Delta, or MEND. With kidnappings and armed attacks, the movement combines illegal action with political claims. In 2008, it forced a 25% reduction in Nigeria's oil production. The world's crude prices soared. The government was obliged to propose an amnesty.
There will be violent conflicts since about 2005 or thereabout, kidnappings of people. They will kidnap people and then they will pay ransom. Government was paying, oil companies were paying. They paid the militants to protect the pipelines. So the business was booming. But it got to a point where the violence was getting a bit more intense and oil production was dropping. Really dropped. And so the singular purpose of the government in trying to stop the violence is to let the oil corporations open up the markets again. It is not an interest to sustain peace in the region. It's not an interest of cleaning up the oil spills or developing the region. Is simply to allow more oil to be extracted.
Oil may be flowing into the holds of huge tankers, but in Lagos, petrol shortages are chronic. The country's 4 refineries are obsolete. The continent's main oil exporter is forced to import refined petrol, a paradox that reaps fortunes for a handful of companies. Encouraged by the oil companies, corruption has become a system of government. Some $50 billion are estimated to have disappeared out of the $350 billion received since independence. In July 2003, George W. Bush chose Nigeria for his first African visit. By 2020, with its high-quality reserves, Africa should be supplying 25% of America's crude oil.
Several African governments face particular dangers from terrorists. And the United States is working closely with those nations to fight terror. And we will do more. I propose a new $100 million initiative to help those governments in East Africa protect their people and to fight terrorist networks.
The United States, for reasons of energy security, seeks to diversify its sources of supply. And Africa looks very appealing because it's another option, an alternative to the Middle East, number one. Number two, Africa's right across the Atlantic from the United States.
Africa is the new El Dorado for the United States and the Seven Sisters. So peace had to be made with the main producer, Libya. Too bad if Colonel Gaddafi was a criminal. Business came first. The former pariah of the international community was clean again. Oil business realism. The country opened up, and its oil became the main attraction. All the experts agreed it's the most promising producer in Africa.
Well, some people say things that there is a contradiction in the policy that, you know, for example, President Bush once, and even before him, they look at Libya as one of the axis of evil or whatever. Then second day it become a friend. Of course, this is due to the fact that these countries have no friends and have no enemies. They have interests. We know that they are not because they love us, they come here. And we know that not because we love them that we allow them to come here, but there is a common interest for us. It serves our interest. And there is, in oil industry, it is a win-win situation for both of us.
In 2003, Libya officially acknowledged the responsibility of its officers in the Lockerbie and UTA 772 attacks. In a cunning move, Gaddafi paid more than $2 billion in damages to the victims' families. The colonel's bet paid off. The sanctions were lifted. He was no longer persona non grata, an arrangement made of oil and dollars.
You have a queue of Western oil companies coming into the country. Okay, any sensible, reasonable politician in the UK or in the United States, for that matter, would think twice about causing any harm to the relations with Libya because of the oil interests, mainly the oil interests.
Abdel Basset al-Megrahi, sentenced to life imprisonment for the death of 270 people in the Lockerbie attack, was freed by the British in August 2009 for humanitarian reasons. According to the Sunday Times, his release was linked to the signature of an important oil contract with BP. For Downing Street, this was merely a coincidence.
And oil must have been in the mind of the people who settled the issue of al-Megrahi. I'm sure of that.
Muammar Gaddafi welcomed al-Megrahi as a hero on the Tripoli runway. Blood, dollars, and oil. The price to pay for the Seven Sisters' return to Libya. For the Seven Sisters and their competitors, Chinese, Indian, Russian, Italian, and French alike, the hunting season in the Black El Dorado was open once more. But not even the sisters could have foreseen the events of February 2011, when the Libyan people rose up against their brother leader. By October 2011, after months of hiding, the colonel was lynched by a mob of his own people. His oil minister, Shokri Ghanem, who was interviewed for this film, had fled to Vienna during the fighting. In May 2012, he was found dead, floating in the Danube River. Austrian authorities say it was a heart attack. Libya is back to pumping more than 1 million barrels of oil per day. It needs the money to rebuild after the civil war. And the sisters, they're happy to oblige. Mount Ararat, at the crossroads between East and West. Wars among nations, among ethnic groups and fraternities have left ageless ruins and broken tombs. In the Caucasus, the American eagle and the Russian bear are vying for control of the region. The great oil game is in full swing.
One big reason why the United States is there is the residue of the Cold War. The United States wants to, it's a way for the United States to battle Russia. It's a way to, in the US view, keep Russia in check in its own backyard, in the Caucasus and Central Asia. But one can say with some confidence that the US wouldn't be there at this strength, with this passion, if it were not for oil.
Tbilisi, Yerevan, and Baku, the three capitals of the Caucasus. Whoever controls the Caucasus and its roads controls the transport of oil from the Caspian Sea. The oil from Baku in Azerbaijan is a strategic priority for all the major companies. But the real story, the secret story of oil, begins far from Baku, in Scotland, in the heart of the Highlands, at Achnacarry Castle on August 28, 1928. Under the pretext of a hunting party, three men have an appointment here: a Dutchman, an American, and an Englishman. This pheasant and grouse hunt was never filmed. There are no photos or archive records, but this is probably how it happened. The Dutchman is Henry Detterding, an implacable and determined man, nicknamed the Napoleon of oil. He runs the all-powerful Royal Dutch Shell. The American is Walter C. Teagle. He represents the Standard Oil Company, founded by John D. Rockefeller at the age of 31, the future Exxon. The Englishman, Sir John Cadman, director of the Anglo-Persian Oil Company, soon to become BP. At the castle, the leading lights of the oil trade are seated, and their secret meeting can begin. The world needs oil, and the companies are engaged in a pitiless battle. War is perhaps good for business, but competition is not. Henry Detterding declares, it is time to exploit, fraternally and to the greatest profit, the world's oil resources. Production zones, transport costs, sales prices, everything must be agreed and shared. A secret pact is sealed, but with no signatures. The great oil cartel can prepare to dominate the world. On this morning of August 29, 1928, the world order has changed. Other companies will join the billionaires' conspiracy. History will call them the Seven Sisters. In Armenia, there is neither war nor peace with the Azeris. The slightest spark could trigger new hostilities. Oil is perhaps the reason.
Նավթի համար այսօր մղվում է պայքար, այդ ռեսուրսների առհասարակ բնական ռեսուրսների համար պայքար է մղվում ոչ միայն տեղական ուժերի միջև, այլ առավել եւս դրսի մեծ տերությունների եւ նրանց հետ համագործակցող տրանսնացիոնալ այդ ընկերությունների միջև է այս պայքարը։ Այդ պայքարը այսօր նավթի համար մղում են Ռուսաստանը, Արևմուտքը, British Petroleum-ի պես, Exxon-ի եւ Mobil-ի պես ընկերությունները, Gazprom-ը, ռուսական եւ այլն։ Սրանք են այս տարածաշրջանում մղում իրենց պայքարը։
The road leads through a forest of rocking horses and derricks. For more than a century, they've been pumping black gold from the depths of the earth, making a fortune for Baku, the capital of Azerbaijan. The Caucasus stands as a border between East and West, a battleground for Russia, the United States, and the great oil companies. The oil of the Caspian Sea is a hotly disputed commodity. In the midst of the derricks stands the ancient temple of Ateshgah, the House of Eternal Fire, a former sanctuary for the Zoroastrians, fire worshippers who traveled the old Silk Road from India. Many still come here to pay homage to Azza, or fire. At the end of the 19th century, a Swedish family, the Nobels, established Baku as the world's oil capital. Known as the Merchant of Death, Alfred Nobel invented dynamite and earned a fortune. Ludwig Nobel ran an arms factory for the Russian Tsar. And Robert, the third brother, bought oil fields near Baku for just a few rubles. An inspired investment, as the region was rich with oil that few were interested in.
En 1901, Azerbaïdjan a dépassé, ça veut dire la région de Bakou a dépassé en matière d'extraction du pétrole, celle extraite aux États-Unis.
Oil flowed and immense fortunes were made. The Parisian bankers, the Rothschilds, arrived to break the Nobel's monopoly. They financed the construction of a railway line from Baku to the port of Batumi. Standard Oil and Royal Dutch Shell, among others, sought to benefit from the sea of oil. But their projects were thwarted by a Georgian, Stalin, who led Bolshevik uprisings among the derricks. The revolution broke out with a cannon shot fired from the cruiser Aurora. It was October 25th, 1917. It would take Lenin 3 years to conquer Russia and take Baku.
Lénine envoyait une télégramme secrète le 17 mars 1920. Il faut absolument prendre Bakou. Bakou a un intérêt vital pour la Russie bolchevique, la Russie actuelle, parce qu'il nous faut le pétrole.
Lenin's wish was granted. The Red Army entered Baku and forced out the British, German and Turkish troops which had come to secure their oil. In April 1920, the 400 oil companies operating in Baku were all nationalized by the new Soviet regime. In Europe, black oil was flowing, as was a plague of brown shirts. In 1933, Hitler was elected Chancellor of the Reich, and he could put his great plans into action. The people's car, the Volkswagen, was built. Industry worked overtime, and Hitler could plan his expansionist war. Nazi Germany had no oil, but the Chancellor had contacts. The German company IG Farben signed a cooperation agreement with the American oil company Exxon. Exxon provided Germany with the necessary patents for making synthetic petrol.
Le vrai problème de l'Allemagne était, bien entendu, son absence d'accès aux matières premières. L'Allemagne n'avait pas de pétrole. Elle avait, par contre, imaginé développer beaucoup de gammes de pétrole synthétique. Et elle a été aidée dans cet effort de manière décisive par Exxon. Et il y a eu une collaboration active qui s'est engagée entre le premier groupe pétrolier Exxon et IG Farben, qui est devenu véritablement qui était le plus gros groupe chimique au monde et qui était, je dirais, une pièce maîtresse de l'effort de guerre nazi.
In the middle of what would become the Second World War, the American justice system would charge Exxon with criminal conspiracy. Under pressure from Congress, the charges were dropped, and the firm was discreetly fined a total of $50,000. Business was more important than war, which was seen only as a transitory evil. On August 23, 1939, there was an upset. A non-aggression pact was signed between the Nazi regime and the communist state. an improbable alliance between Soviet Foreign Minister Vyacheslav Molotov and his Nazi counterpart, Joachim von Ribbentrop. Moscow lent its factories to Germany, secretly building up its army. But at the heart of the German concerns was oil. Between 1939 and 1941, Moscow delivered 65 million barrels to Berlin. And so it was Russian and American petrol that the US majors continued to provide in secret that fueled the German panzers as they swept across Europe.
Le XXe siècle s'est ouvert sur cette prise de conscience que les guerres à l'avenir dépendraient en effet justement de la mécanisation et donc effectivement donc du pétrole. Et puis la Deuxième Guerre mondiale en a été un exemple flagrant et on voit très bien de quelle manière en effet notamment les nazis, les armées nazies avaient comme objectif en 1941 en attaquant je veux dire donc la Russie de mettre la main comme objectif de mettre la main sur le pétrole de la mer Caspienne.
On his birthday, Adolf Hitler received a chocolate and cream birthday cake representing a map. He chose the slice with Baku on it. This film is a pure product of the Soviet propaganda machine. Baku's oil is perhaps the real reason Operation Barbarossa was launched. On June 22, 1941, the armies of the Third Reich invaded Russia. The crucial Battle of Stalingrad, the key to the road to the Caucasus and Baku's oil, would decide the outcome of the war. Stalin told his troops, fighting for one's oil is fighting for one's freedom. The battle was won. On January 31, 1943, Field Marshal Friedrich Paulus signed the German troops' capitulation. The Germans had lost the Battle of Stalingrad and the war.
À la suite des accords d'Aknakari, vers la Deuxième Guerre mondiale s'est révélé l'un des moments les plus profitables pour les pétroliers. C'est-à-dire que tout le pétrole qui était chargé, par exemple, qui provenait de la raffinerie d'Abadan, et qui était, ou le ravitaillement des navires militaires, anglais comme américains, dans cette zone, était facturé par les compagnies pétrolières, je veux dire, au gouvernement britannique ou américain, au prix calculé lors d'Aknakari, c'est-à-dire au prix le plus cher, c'est-à-dire le prix d'un transport entre le golfe du Mexique et la destination d'arrivée. Ce pétrole a coûté une fortune à l'effort de guerre allié et a contribué à enrichir de façon extraordinaire les compagnies pétrolières pendant toute cette période. C'est une des périodes où les pétroliers ont gagné le plus d'argent, bien entendu, sans avoir de compte à rendre. Pas une seule fois, en effet, je veux dire, le gouvernement britannique ou américain n'a tenté d'infléchir ou de peser sur ces comportements, qui étaient des comportements, il faut bien le dire, au minimum scandaleux.
The Caspian Sea is awash with the traces of a murky past. The horses' heads maintain a steady pressure on the pumps that operate non-stop. Baku's oil kept the USSR's industry and war effort alive, but the Soviet Union had been weakened and needed to find new oil fields. The miracle would come from an Azeri man, Farman Salmanov, a geological genius. Without Moscow's consent, he began to explore near Surgut in Siberia, along the banks of the river Ob. Everyone thought he was insane. He was alone in thinking that there was oil beneath the Siberian wastelands.
Il croit que le pétrole se trouve précisément dans les régions de Surgut. Il coupe toutes les communications pour qu'il ne puisse pas être joignable, pour qu'on ne puisse pas le retirer de cette région. Il fait les prospections de jour à jour et finalement, le premier jet du pétrole qui sort de cette région, il envoie un télégramme à plusieurs dirigeants, mais c'est précisément le télégramme à Khrushchev en 1963. Il envoie un télégramme que le pétrole se trouve là, voici c'est la vérité. Il signe Farman Salmanov.
In the midst of the Cold War, this terse telegram would change the balance of world power, and the Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev would celebrate victory. Farman Salmanov was later awarded the title of Hero of Soviet Labor and the Lenin Prize. The USSR became the second biggest oil exporter after Saudi Arabia. The communist Russian bear was standing proud and tall.
Farman Salmanov a sauvé l'Union soviétique en trouvant les gisements du pétrole qui servira les sources principales de revenus de l'Union soviétique en matière de devises étrangères.
To transport the oil, the Druzhba pipeline, or the Friendship Pipeline, had two purposes: to supply the satellite republics as a reward for their total submission, and to take the Russian oil to Europe's markets and its currency. In Apulia in southeastern Italy, we're on the trail of a man who changed the course of oil history. An exceptional figure who, in 1953, created for Italy the powerful oil company Eni. After Italy's downfall in World War II, reconstruction was American-led, and oil was supplied by the Seven Sisters. It was the price to pay for defeat. This exceptional man is called Enrico Mattei, the most important Italian since Julius Caesar, it is still said. A resistance hero and industrial genius, he decided to free Italy of its dependence on the oil majors. It was the beginning of a contest against those he called the Sette Sorelle, the Seven Sisters. Enrico Mattei launched his oil diplomacy campaign. In 1957, he signed a contract with Iran, leaving 75% of the profits to the producer. It was a bombshell in the Seven Sisters' backyard. He then turned to other countries, including Egypt and Nigeria.
Mattei è considerato un pirata con la sua formula, con le condizioni così vantaggiose che dà a piccoli paesi produttori di petrolio. È considerato un pirata perché le grandi compagnie petrolifere sono abituate a contare nei rispettivi paesi, sulla scena internazionale, addirittura più dei governi.
And yet Mattei dared the unthinkable. He worked directly with the USSR and met with the head of the Soviet parliament, Andrei Gromyko. The Soviets agreed to deliver large quantities of oil at a low price.
Mattei rompe completamente questo equilibrio con la sua iniziativa e va a fare accordi con l'Unione Sovietica per l'importazione di petrolio a prezzi molto, molto convenienti. Soprattutto altera l'equilibrio che è un equilibrio politico-diplomatico fissato dagli Stati Uniti e dalla Inghilterra. Va entrato anche nel mirino di grandi potenze, è entrato nel mirino per i suoi giochi che non hanno soltanto una caratteristica industriale e commerciale, ma hanno una forte valenza politica. E quindi Mattei viene molto seguito dai servizi segreti, specialmente americani.
On October 27, 1962, Enrico Mattei's plane, a Maran Solnier, crashed near Milan. There were no survivors. The investigation was botched. Bad weather was blamed for the crash. When the case was reopened in 1997, traces of explosives were found among the aircraft debris. It was a deliberate attack. The men behind the plot have still not been identified. Elected president in 1983, Ronald Reagan qualified the USSR as an evil empire. The Star Wars anti-missile programs were supposedly intended for protection from a nuclear war. But Washington's objective was, above all, to force the Soviets into an arms race. Ronald Reagan and William Casey, the director of the CIA, planned the first stage of the trap. The Great Bear Hunt was underway. The bear is a daunting creature, the Red Army, 5 million men and nuclear weapons, a vast war machine fueled by oil money.
Pour être toujours en mesure de contrer
l'avance technologique des États-Unis, le gouvernement soviétique a été obligé de mobiliser des sommes très importantes. Avec quel argent les Soviétiques finançaient cet effort du complexe militaro-industriel? Avec les exportations de matières premières, essentiellement d'ailleurs du pétrole et du gaz.
The second part of the trap would be laid by the Saudis. Reagan persuaded his ally, King Fahd, to use oil as a weapon to destabilize the USSR. In 1983, Saudi Arabia opened up the gates and flooded the oil market.
لفخامتكم عن سعادتي بهذا اللقاء الذي يجمع بنا جميعا لأول مرة على أرض الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية.
Reagan, by encouraging the Saudis to overproduce, collapsed the price of oil in the 80s. That brought about a disaster, by the way, in many countries. But the biggest effect was that the former Soviet Union, depending almost entirely on oil and gas for its hard currency, the internal fractures of that regime became gaping chasms, gaping holes, and it collapsed. The rest is history.
Through the Washington-Riyadh agreements, the United States controlled the world's principal oil outlet, an ultimate weapon in American hands.
In the 1980s, the price of oil plummeted, and it plummeted to $13 a barrel. This cratered the Soviet economy. It didn't have the money any longer to keep itself afloat, to pay pensions, to pay coal miners, to buy coal miners soap, to pay for the social services that kept the populace quiet, to pay for vodka.
The Soviet bear was dancing no more. It was hungover and broke. The stores were empty, wages were unpaid, and trouble was brewing. President Mikhail Gorbachev was powerless. The country was ruined. The price of oil had definitively shattered the Soviet Union. 1989, the Berlin Wall falls. The Baltic states, Georgia and Armenia, declare independence. On December 25, 1991, Mikhail Gorbachev resigns as head of state. The communist empire had crumbled. The bear had been skinned. This is the story of the Seven Sisters Cartel, a group of companies that dominate the world's petroleum industry. Exxon, Shell, BP, Mobil, Texaco, Gulf, and Chevron. It began with a secret meeting between three top oil traders back in 1928 and a secret pact to start exploiting the world's oil resources. On the shores of the Caspian Sea is the Azeri capital, Baku. The image of former President Haidar Aliyev is omnipresent. A former KGB director, when the USSR crumbled, the president was the providential savior of the new Azerbaijan. His idea was simple, to look to the West and call on the major oil companies. On September 24, 1994, guided by BP, the century's biggest contract was signed with 11 other oil companies. Without realizing it, Azerbaijan had entrusted its oil to the Seven Sisters. Azeri, Chirag, Guneshli. These new offshore oil fields, financed by the majors, promise untold treasures. President Haidar Aliyev and his son Ilham can certainly rejoice. Their fortune is made and their power well established.
Но только в рамках одного контракта мы
фактически за 10 лет заработали 24 миллиарда долларов. И на 2009 год бюджет Азербайджана уже 15 миллиардов. И это благодаря нефти. И в результате вы, наверное, сами увидели, как город меняется. И если отсюда посмотреть, многие иностранцы иногда говорят, либо это второй Дубай, либо в центре города, как Манхэттен, высокоэтажные дома. К чему привел нефтедоходы? В сотрудничестве с иностранцами.
The flip side is that not everyone is invited to the new Dubai. 500,000 Azeri refugees, survivors of the war against neighboring Armenia, eke out a living on a long, motionless journey in abandoned railroad cars, far from the spoils of the oil trade. After the fall of the USSR, Nagorno-Karabakh, a region of Azerbaijan with a mainly Armenian population, was beset with unrest. The Russians distributed weapons to both sides, but in 1994, Baku signed its lucrative contract with the Western majors. Moscow was infuriated. They encouraged the Armenians, who fought and won independence for Karabakh, a place that Baku had dreamed of reconquering. A war regarded as ethnic had a distinct smell of petrol. Three years earlier, in Moscow, Boris Yeltsin addressed the crowd from a T-72 tank. The Russian president had stopped an attempted revolt by neo-communists. It would be his job to build the new liberal Russia the Western democracies wanted. Through a lack of maintenance and funding, the Russian oil industry was in a pitiful state. The new president needed money to save the country from ruin. Anatoly Chubais, an ambitious young minister, provided a solution. His idea was simple: to privatize the oil companies. Fresh from university, not yet 30 years old, they'd run businesses and started banks with no fear or doubt. Berezovsky, Abramovich, Khodorkovsky, a dozen or so men who seized the privatized companies for a pittance.
Dans toute la décennie 90, la Russie appartient aux oligarques. Pour des prix absolument dérisoires, ces jeunes types se sont retrouvés propriétaires d'un certain nombre d'actifs pétroliers de premier plan en Russie. Ces oligarques tiennent le pays et il y a une telle osmose entre eux et l'entourage de Boris Yeltsin au Kremlin qu'au fond, ils dirigent de fait le pays.
The Seven Sisters flocked to a new El Dorado and were welcomed with open arms. Russian oil needed technology and investments, and the new young owners needed dollars. The Russian oil fields were for sale, and the majors needed to buy.
Everybody thought the right answer for getting the Russian petroleum sector back on its feet, because it had been struggling, was to get Western companies in, Western technologies, Western finance, all of that managerial skill, put it to work, and build up the Russian petroleum sector. In order to do that, these petro-oligarchs were created as the counterpart, the vis-a-vis for the Western companies.
Back in the Caucasus, the Armenian sacred mountain Ararat is guarded by Russian watchtowers. The Russian bear had offered the country its protection, a way of surveilling Baku's oil and the trade routes. When one buys petrol here, the source is not important, contraband or otherwise. The borders here are also of little importance. The region's geography is defined by pipeline diplomacy. To get the oil out of Baku and to take it to Turkey, then Europe, the most direct route passes through Iran, which the Americans categorically refused to take. Another project crosses Armenia, which Azerbaijan refuses, still being at war with its neighbor. The only route possible is via the north and Georgia, a detour of 600 kilometers and millions of dollars more. The BTC was created, the Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan, a pipeline 1,774 kilometers long, built at a cost of $4 billion. The Caspian Sea oil avoided Russia, but in Moscow, power was changing hands. A new Tsar was enthroned, a former KGB colonel by the name of Vladimir Putin. He too needed oil revenues to finance the Russian renewal and reinforce its international influence. There was no question of letting the oil flow away unheeded.
Putin moving into the Kremlin and realizing that the oligarchs ran the Kremlin, he didn't. And he set about changing the balance of power. He basically had to find somebody that he was going to use to make the example amongst the oligarchs that you are allowed to run your businesses, you're allowed to be billionaires, but you will not fiddle around in Russian politics. And Khodorkovsky crossed the line.
In October 2003, Mikhail Khodorkovsky, the all-powerful president of Yukos, Russia's biggest oil company, was arrested. On May 31, 2005, the young billionaire was sentenced to 9 years in prison for fraud and a mockery of a trial.
I think Khodorkovsky had a couple of things going. One was that there was talk of Yukos getting into a relationship with ExxonMobil, and that struck Putin as a step too far also. We are not going to have Western companies owning majority positions in Russian oil companies. We are going to control this as a state. I think Putin believed that for him to have the resources he needed to survive as the president of Russia, he needed both oil and gas revenues to the extent he could accumulate them.
Khodorkovsky, Putin's personal enemy, was tried again. On December 30th, 2010, the oligarch was sentenced to 14 years imprisonment for embezzlement and money laundering. Russian oil regained its rightful place in the new Tsar's coffers.
Putin did bring order. In the first phases of his reassertion of the Kremlin, he brought order to oil and he brought order to gas. And he made it clear Russia has too much interest in these two commodities to let them be handled and frittered away. We want the control of that here in the Kremlin.
President Putin may have re-established order, but the Caucasus seem to have avoided his control. The Georgian capital has changed. There's a distinct scent of dollars in the air. In 2003, the Rose Revolution brought a new young president to power, Mikhail Saakashvili, educated in the US and an ally for Washington.
Oil has put Georgia as on the world map as a geopolitical asset to the West, as a key transit country for Caspian energy. Oil has given the West a key interest in maintaining Georgia's independence and Georgia's viability as a state.
Maintaining independence in the Caucasus is a constant challenge. It's a patchwork of mini republics, self-proclaimed regional states, and ethnic conflicts. South Ossetia and Abkhazia rebelled against Georgia. Moscow encouraged and supported their separatist claims. On August 8, 2008, believing in the United States and perhaps manipulated by Moscow, President Saakashvili attacked South Ossetia. Putin seized the opportunity, and Russian troops, massed along the border, inflicted a severe defeat on the Georgian army. The Russian bear bared its teeth.
If you look at the Eurasian map, you will see that the only obvious way for Caspian oil and gas to go to Europe is through Azerbaijan, without Russian control, is through Azerbaijan and Georgia, this energy corridor. Definitely, this is something that is not very liked by Russian counterparts, and this is something that they would like to avoid in future. And Russian invasion last year was serving that purpose too.
We leave Georgia and head for Armenia. Among the mountains on the front separating the Armenian Karabakh from Azerbaijan, the BTC pipeline is close by, within rifle range. Many believe the Russians engineered the conflict here in order to maintain the pressure. Away from Baku and the Caucasus, on the opposite side of the Caspian Sea in Asia, the combat for oil also continues. Astana, the new capital of Kazakhstan, the Dubai or Manhattan of the steppes. The lavishness orchestrated by President Nursultan Nazarbayev might be seen as excessive, just as excessive as the fact that he's been ruling the country since 1991.
Все крупные международные нефтяные компании сразу же, как только Казахстан получил независимость, оказались здесь, в нашей стране, для того, чтобы установить контроль над нефтяными ресурсами Казахстана. Естественно, первыми оказались здесь крупнейшие американские компании, ну, все, которые называются «Семь сестер», сейчас меньше этих сестер, и практически сразу же за ними пришли крупные европейские компании из двух стран. Это Великобритания и Франция.
After the collapse of the USSR in 1992, the Seven Sisters were waiting to pounce on the country's fabulous oil reserves. Kazakhstan was in financial disarray, and the majors' pockets were filled with dollars. Chevron, advised by Condoleezza Rice, showed its generosity towards the authorities. $100 million found their way into President Nazarbayev's Swiss accounts.
Первые годы, конечно, когда пришли крупнейшие нефтяные компании, и не было еще никаких антикоррупционных здесь механизмов, уходили самые ужасные здесь слухи, что, допустим, об Эль-Факитен говорили, что чуть ли не приглашали группами депутатов нашего парламента во Францию, и там показывали, конечно, как фирма работает, какие у нее прогрессивные технологии, это все понятно, это хорошо, но заодно оплачивали проживание в пятизвездочных отелях, и даже были слухи, что просто привозили их там, скажем, в какой-то хороший магазин и говорили: покупайте себе одежду, что вам нравится, все оплачено и так далее.
A single road crosses this vast country, 5 times the size of France. The steppes stretch out beyond the horizon, once traversed by ancient nomads and Mongol horsemen. The Kazakh president Nazarbayev talks of making the country one of the world's largest oil producers. But half the population here gain nothing from oil revenues, and a quarter of them have no access to drinking water. In the middle of the desert, the oil installations have replaced the caravanserais, and the oil trains bear their cargo along the old Silk Road. At the end of the trail is Atirau, a city that dreams of becoming Asia's Houston. Fishing and caviar once made the reputation of this small town on the fringes of the Soviet Empire. Today, it's a hunting ground for the oil trade conquistadors.
Можно ли сказать, что те наследники Семи сестер установили контроль над казахстанской нефтью? В принципе, ответ «да». Это самые последние крупные приобретения тех компаний, которые можно назвать наследниками тех Семи сестер. Это месторождение Тенгиз и Кашаган, 6-е и 7-е месторождение по запасам в мире.
Discovered in 2000, north of the Caspian, Kashagan is the biggest offshore oil field in the world. Shared out between Total, Shell, Exxon, Mobil, and Eni. At a depth of 5,000 meters, permeated with sulfur and gas, It's the most inaccessible oil in the history of production and a major ecological risk.
Не было специалистов, которые соображают по этим контрактам. И западные специалисты как хотели, так и толковали. Раньше они считали, что для освоения стоит Кашагану нужно 50 миллиардов. Потом они взяли, пересчитали, сказали, что нужно 130 миллиардов. Это повышение 3 раза. Это гигантские суммы. Это настолько гигантские суммы, это просто фантастические суммы. Контракт ПСА заключается в том, что их расходы первоначально компенсируются под хороший процент. И Казахстану никогда за 40 лет не выплатит этот долг, пусть даже за счет нефти.
On this morning's guided tour, we're welcomed at what will be the Balashan refinery. It's a ticking time bomb. A secret report by the ENI company states that in case of an accident, the hydrogen sulfide emissions would kill all the workers here within 15 seconds, and a toxic cloud would form over the town of Atirau in less than 15 minutes.
As a national oil company, as authority, and also with other partners like big companies like ExxonMobil, like Total, Shell, ConocoPhillips, Eni, all of those companies, I believe they believe in the values. And the values for all of us is honesty, integrity, respect between the partners, and the equal treatment. This is the values which we believe in.
Kazakhstan has already mortgaged its oil and its future. But the reserves announced so far swell the company's accounts forecasts and fill their shareholders' pockets.
Но самое опасное – это иллюзия богатства, которая несет нефть. В начале 90-х, когда заключали тенгизский контракт, власть сказала населению, что вот у нас мы откроем Тенгиз, проект начнем, и скоро мы будем жить как в Кувейте. Через 15 лет люди спрашивают, а где наш Кувейт? Кувейта нет.
The neighboring states, Azerbaijan, Russia, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan and Iran, vie for dominion over the Caspian Sea. To avoid Russia, the Seven Sisters wanted to build an underwater pipeline. The Russians and the Iranians refused under the pretext of ecological concerns. A fleet of tankers shuttles back and forth to the terminal at Baku. For Europe and the United States, the stakes are high. Kazakh oil must pass through the BTC pipeline to supply the Western markets. But from further east, a new competitor has joined the game with a limitless appetite. December 15th, 2005. For the first time, Kazakh oil flows eastward. From the Caspian Sea to China, a gigantic pipeline links the Kazakh oil fields and Xinjiang, a Turkish-speaking Muslim province rebelling against Beijing.
China is interested in Kazakhstan's oil. Why? Because it is the only major supplier on China's border that can deliver oil by overland oil routes. And from the Chinese leadership, from a strategic point of view, from an energy security point of view, this is terribly valuable. So it's not relying on oil coming by sea. Any oil coming by sea can be interdicted by the US Navy.
The new pipeline supplies almost 15% of China's oil requirements to the refineries in Xinjiang, the province of the Uyghurs. Beijing considers Central Asia's oil reserves as strategically vital.
And therefore, Xinjiang province is terribly important that it be in firm control of Beijing. It can't allow this to be an unstable area. And therefore, the Chinese leadership views the instability in Xinjiang, the Muslim insurgency of the Uyghurs, as a vital threat to their national security.
Urumqi is the capital of the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. Riots here led to the deaths of hundreds of victims. Hans from China versus Uyghurs who've become a minority in their own province. Repression imposed by Beijing was implacable. Xinjiang must remain under the imperial capital's control. China's energy needs demand it.
On est dans une situation à laquelle même les Américains ne pensaient, ni les Russes ni les Américains ne songeaient, c'est-à-dire qu'il n'est pas simplement une concurrence russo-américaine au Caucase, mais qui maintenant est un jeu à trois. Les Russes au nord, les Américains qui contrôlent l'essentiel des projets au sud, et les Chinois à l'est qui interviennent de plus en plus massivement et qui sans doute vont encore élargir leur influence.
Across the Caucasus and Central Asia, this is the new great oil game. The United States, Russia, and China contest the control of the former USSR's fossil fuel reserves and the supply routes. A three-handed match with the world as spectators between three ferocious beasts: the American eagle, the Russian bear, and the Chinese dragon. The southwest coast of Ireland seems far away from the dirty, treacherous world of oil. But we're here to meet a man who believes that that world could soon come to an end. Everyone calls Colin Campbell Mr. Peak Oil. He's a geologist who's worked with all the leading oil companies and has predicted the decline of oil.
I'm predicting the end of the world. You know, some people describe me as a sort of doomsayer. And there's a certain reality, yes, because I've come to realize that the modern world runs on oil. We're certainly not talking about the end of oil, no. The end of oil, we may never face the end of oil, because who can say the last barrel to be found or produced could go on for a long, long time. What we do face is the peak of oil right now.
The biggest refinery in the world is nicknamed Hell's Alley. When there's no sea breeze, the air is unbreathable. The oil that's burnt and transformed here comes from every continent. Tankers have crossed every ocean to satisfy America's appetite for black gold. 250 million automobiles wait impatiently for their rightful supplies. It's the price of the American way of life. But the real story, the secret story of oil, begins far from Houston, in Scotland, in the heart of the Highlands, at Achnacarry Castle on August 28, 1928. Under the pretext of a hunting party, three men have an appointment here: a Dutchman, an American, and an Englishman. This pheasant and grouse hunt was never filmed. There are no photos or archive records, but this is probably how it happened. The Dutchman is Henry Detterding, an implacable and determined man nicknamed the Napoleon of oil. He runs the all-powerful Royal Dutch Shell. The American is Walter C. Teagle. He represents the Standard Oil Company, founded by John D. Rockefeller at the age of 31, the future Exxon. The Englishman, Sir John Cadman, director of the Anglo-Persian Oil Company, soon to become BP. At the castle, the leading lights of the oil trade are seated, and their secret meeting can begin. The world needs oil, and the companies are engaged in a pitiless battle. War is perhaps good for business, but competition is not. Henry Detterding declares, "It is time to exploit, fraternally and to the greatest profit, the world's oil resources. Production zones, transport costs, sales prices, everything must be agreed and shared. A secret pact is sealed, but with no signatures. The great oil cartel can prepare to dominate the world."
Las Siete Hermanas en realidad son un gran cartel, por no decir una mafia transnacional, que se ha apoderado del petróleo de distintos países petroleros y prácticamente se reparten no solamente la ganancia que produce el petróleo, sino que se reparten también el control del mundo.
On this morning of August 29, 1928, the world order has changed. Other companies would soon join the billionaires' conspiracy. History will call them the Seven Sisters. Colin Campbell spends a quiet retirement here, among the pubs and coloured houses in the Irish village of Ballydehob. As the head of the Association for the Study of Peak Oil, Colin is not concerned about whether peak oil exists, but when it will happen. It's a reality the world refuses to accept. But a barrel of oil, says Campbell, is like a barrel of beer. The faster you drink, the sooner it's finished.
There's no doubt that the decline of oil will make those who continue to have a large share, which is mainly the Middle East, will be under increasing pressure from China and the United States, and lesser degree Europe and other countries, to produce that oil. But they will be under pressure to produce, and they may be under military pressure.
As far as the eye can see, amidst the cotton fields, tens of thousands of nodding donkeys shake their heads. They've been pumping the very blood of the American economy for more than 100 years, an archetypal image for generations. In the Texas of cowboys and prime beef, oil is akin to a religion, a lifestyle, all-powerful in making and breaking fortunes. It's said here that there are two curses, communism and taxes. But in this land of free enterprise, there are no income taxes, and everyone owns the ground and resources beneath their own property. There are over 1,300 oil rigs in the Gulf of Mexico, and in Texas, more than 150,000 active oil wells. The companies are often family-owned. This morning, we have an appointment with Doug Robinson, an oil man born and bred.
Being third generation oil, my grandfather, my father, the oil business is in our blood. We like the risk of the oil and gas industry. And there are those who have been very, very rich and very, very poor many times over. And so it's a part of the legend of West Texas.
Texas is also the home state of George W. Bush. Hailing from the town of Midland, the Bushes are a dynasty where oil mixes with politics. The grandfather, Senator Prescott, made his fortune at the head of a bank that supported the Nazi war effort. He advised his sons, get rich and get into politics. His son George grew rich from oil and became president of the United States. His grandson, George W., lost a fortune in oil, but became president anyway. Saturday night in downtown Midland. Farmers and oilmen celebrate the latest fluctuations in oil prices. Broke on Saturday, rich on Monday. Oil is expensive to produce in the USA, and the politicians are duty-bound to protect the smallholders. It's a simple equation. No environmental regulation, high prices, and American oil can be profitable. Every American president has known this, and oilmen have forever financed their campaigns. Texas is a patriotic land, and if a war has to be fought against so-called terrorists or to protect overseas oil fields, the boys are only too willing.
Oil is strategic. You have to have it. And if you don't have it, then the people that are doing without it are going to come take it away from you to get it. It's like food. If you don't have food, you're going to be forced to go get it.
On the other side of the globe, the Shatt al-Arab is where the Tigris meets the Euphrates. This launch, belonging to the South Oil Company, is heading for the Al Bakr offshore terminal near Basra. An American patrol boards. No one can approach the terminal without permission. Even the director of South Oil, an Iraqi, has to comply. 85% of Iraqi oil passes through Basra. The terminal is of vital importance, and its protection top priority. Iraqi oil under American control. For the Iraqi employees, this was the ultimate humiliation.
منطقيا لا أقبل هذا الشيء وأتمنى أنه يكون التفتيش بيد العراقيين حصرا. أتمنى خروج المحتل بالسرعة الممكنة. اللي نقر هذا الشيء كعراقيين ككل، يعني احنا ظلمنا في العهد صدام مرتين. ظلمنا في حياة صدام وفي ممات صدام. في حياته كان هو مسيطر والنظام مالته الظالم، وفي موته جاب قوات الاحتلال.
As the American tankers are filled with Iraqi oil, we head north to Baghdad. It's a chaotic city. Bombs explode frequently. But it's not clear who the enemy is. The patrols are Iraqi, the uniforms and weapons supplied by the USA. We are here to meet a former oil minister.
But when we look at the whole of Iraq, Iraq is also rich in oil everywhere. And just for your information, being an oilman, although Iraq was one of the earliest oil producer in the region, it is the least explored, okay? The success ratio, I mean, if we drill 100 wells in Iraq, 73 wells would hit oil. This is the historical, experience. So there is so much oil in the region of Kurdistan, and now we are hearing about new discoveries, and I'm not surprised at all.
The road to the north, towards the mountains of Iraq's northern Kurdish region. A land of shepherds, for a long time ruled and dominated by Baghdad, this region has discovered potential oil wealth and dreams of independence. A nightmare for the centralized regime in Baghdad. In 2007, the Kurdish parliament unanimously approved a new oil law, granting the local authorities the freedom to deliver licenses and exports without referring to Baghdad. It was party time in Erbil, the capital of this region. On June 3, 2009, Iraqi President Jalal Talabani and Kurdish leader Masoud Barzani opened up the flow of Kurdish oil. With a flag, a military force, a national anthem, and a language, Iraq's Kurdish north is ready to become a nation. Since the American troops withdrew, there have been battles between Kurds, Shias, and Sunnis. The Kurds dream of taking Kirkuk as their capital. But Kirkuk is oil-rich, very rich, and Baghdad has no intention of letting it go. In October 2009, Baghdad switched off the Kurdish oil taps. The oil produced in this region now had to flow through Iraqi pipelines. The oil revenues were to be centralized in Baghdad, and Iraq's northern Kurds would receive 17% of state income. The question of sharing the oil money became a potential motive for civil war.
The present situation, there are a number of perhaps 28 contracts that have been awarded by the Federal Region of Kurdistan to oil companies without coordination with the federal government in Iraq. And this, of course, led to frictions between the Minister of Oil and the Minister of Natural Resources in Kurdistan. One of the points that we really upset, people, oilmen and regulators in Baghdad is that those contracts were not awarded in the spirit that we and the arrangement that we agreed on in the draft law.
200,000 Kurdish fighters, the Peshmerga, or those who face death, ensure the region's security. The new wealth and the probable autonomy of the region are a cause for concern among the neighboring countries, all with substantial Kurd communities: Turkey, Syria, and Iran. Oil may bring riches, but also rivalries and resentment.
خاڵێکی زۆر بەهێزە بۆ ئەوی بتوانێت ئایندەیەکی زۆر باش بۆ هەرێمی کوردستان پڕکەنێ. ئەم ئایندەیە بێگومان کاریگەری لەسەر وڵاتانی سووریا و تورکیا و ئێرانیش هەیە، بۆیە تەنها عێراق نییە کە دژی ئەوەیە، ڕەنگە وڵاتانی دراوسێش پێیان خۆش نەبێت کە کورد خاوەنی نەوت بێ و خۆی بتوانێت نەوت بەرهەم بێنێ و داهاتەکەشی بۆ کورد خۆی بێ.
Iran keeps a watchful eye over the friction between the Kurds and Baghdad. The American-led war in the region gave Tehran considerable potential for interfering. A political influence in the region that, for many years, means that any president in Baghdad must have Iran's blessing. Once again, the United States opened up a Pandora's box and had a hard time closing it. Baghdad blocks the Kurdish oil exports, and so the refined petrol convoys head to neighboring Iran, a vast, strange traffic flow, and the Iraqi Kurdish oil bypasses Baghdad. Isolated by a US-imposed embargo, Iran lacks refineries. It has to import a considerable proportion of its petrol, an absurd paradox for the world's third biggest oil producer.
L'Iran a des ressources considérables qui sont elles aussi sous-exploitées parce que l'Iran fait l'objet de sanctions internationales et de sanctions américaines de la part des États-Unis, qui visent pour partie son secteur pétrolier et gazier et qui amènent les grandes compagnies pétrolières occidentales à refuser de plus en plus, de droit ou de fait, de travailler en Iran. Donc l'Iran est de plus en plus isolé alors qu'il a besoin d'investissements étrangers massifs pour développer son potentiel pétrolier et gazier qui est considérable. Dans tous les cas, l'Iran est dans les 3 premiers détenteurs de réserves pétrolière et gazière, ce qui lui donne un rôle essentiel pour les équilibres énergétiques futurs.
In Tehran, there are calls for an economic jihad. With inflation, unemployment, and a lack of freedom, discontent is growing. Oil revenues fund projects for appeasing the poorer populations, the regime's main supporters. The American embargo has proved to be an effective weapon in this respect. But apart from oil, Iran has nothing to export, except pistachios and carpets.
Our friend Iranian, we have to tame them, and we have to be friendly with them. They also have, they control the Al-Hormuz entrance to the Arabian Gulf. And also they control the inflow of oil to the world. They are in Iraq, they are in Gaza, they are in Lebanon. They are almost in the region where the hot points, they are there. And they have the so-called the nuclear. So they are disturbing everybody. Not only the local region, but also the international. And everybody is worried.
The Americans too fear Tehran's wrath. The Strait of Hormuz off the coast of Iran is one of the most strategically important and vulnerable places on the planet. The US Navy's Fifth Fleet watches over the world's most important sea passage. More than 15 million barrels of oil pass through the strait every day. The foreign press have been invited today. There are no censors in sight. The giant South Pars Iranian oil and gas complex needs foreign investment. It's vital. Since 1996, the American embargo has been choking the world's third biggest oil producer. The vice is tightening around the regime, which the US accuses of developing nuclear weapons. The last oil giants, Total and Shell, have pulled out. The embargo has intensified. The last companies operating here are Chinese, Indian, and Malaysian.
所以说，至于西方的这种指责是吧？比如说是美国担心伊朗发展核武器是吧？或者是说和伊朗有可能发生冲突啊，然后中国还要去发展和伊朗的关系，这样的话就这种指责，我认为还是没什么道理的，因为你和某个国家关系不好，并不能排斥其他国家和这个关系不好。我只要是合法，是吧？我没有违背联合国的这种基本的一些游戏规则的话，那我这种行为就是我认为就是正常的。所以说，我不认同你刚才讲的西方人的这种观点。如果按照这样的逻辑的话，那你只要是和美国关系都不好，那其他国家都不能和这个国家去建立关系。那这显然是。
We have our new friend is coming, China. They are ambitious, and they want to see more. And if they are number 2 in the world economy, that's not going to be for long, because they want to be number 1. And to be number 1, they have to have oil.
Tiananmen Square, scene of the 1989 massacre. On the facade of the imperial city, a portrait of Mao Zedong and the motto, "Long live the People's Republic of China." To survive, China needs oil, a lot of oil. But China is not alone. The world's 2 biggest oil consumers, China and the United States, are waging a pitiless battle in the ongoing energy race. For the moment, it's being fought on economic and diplomatic grounds.
Like the United States, China is very, very concerned about energy security. It's worried about the security of supply, about disruptions. And it's worried, like the United States, that it is excessively dependent on the Middle East. Now, and there's some irony there. On one hand, China depends on the United States to ensure stability of the Middle East. On the other hand, China is fearful of being over-dependent on the United States, that in the event of a clash with the United States, the US Navy could seal the Persian Gulf to Chinese ships.
80% of China's oil imports pass through the Strait of Malacca, between Malaysia and Indonesia. Transport that the American Navy could easily interrupt. And so Beijing reinforces its naval capacity.
中国现在进口的石油呢，应该说是逐渐的有点就是分散多元化了。因为过去呢，主要是从中东进口石油。那么现在呢，就是说除了中东以外， 中国的石油来源呢，比如说像非洲、像南美洲，像这个中亚，包括还有俄罗斯。
For the last 30 years, China grew annually at 10%. Its appetite for oil appears limitless. The country has set off to conquer the world. The Middle East, Africa, and now South America. This is the story of the Seven Sisters Cartel, a group of companies that dominate the world's petroleum industry. Exxon, Shell, BP, Mobil, Texaco, Gulf, and Chevron. It began with a secret meeting between 3 top oil traders back in 1928 and a secret pact to start exploiting the world's oil resources. The first navigators called Venezuela Tierra de Gracia, the land of grace. For almost a century, South America's oil made fortunes for the Seven Sisters. Loaded in the ports of Venezuela and Mexico, it set sail for the refineries of Houston and Port Arthur.
Cuando yo entré aquí en el año 80, los barcos en las antiguas filiales no había un control fiscal del petróleo como tal, se exportaba petróleo a granel y se llevaron mucha por la producción, los yacimientos de nuestros pozos fueron explotados indiscriminadamente por las antiguas filiales y inclusive era como regalado, no pagaban impuestos al país, o sea, el petróleo, los beneficios del petróleo no se quedaban aquí, se lo llevaban los grandes transnacionales.
In the north of Venezuela is Lake Maracaibo, home to the PDVSA, the national oil company, and the scene of some of the worst plundering in the history of oil. In the 1920s, the dictator General Juan Vincent Gomez opened Venezuela's doors to the oil majors. They all enjoyed the spoils, giving generous kickbacks to the general and his clan. Despite the corruption, it was worth it. The reserves were colossal. Lake Maracaibo was covered with hundreds of derricks and wells. Venezuela became the world's second biggest oil producer after the United States. The Seven Sisters ruled the roost.
Nosotros no tenemos la menor duda de que los verdaderos dueños del petróleo en Venezuela, durante mucho tiempo o en el menor de los casos, los que tuvieron la última palabra en qué hacer con el petróleo en Venezuela fueron las transnacionales y principalmente las transnacionales norteamericanas. Justamente en esta ciudad, en la ciudad de Maracaibo, y justamente en este estado fue que se comenzó hace aproximadamente 100 años la explotación petrolera. Unos pozos que irrumpieron con una fuerza natural y que convirtió a esta zona justamente en una zona de referencia internacional.
February 1999. Colonel Hugo Chavez is elected president of Venezuela. Like his model, the Libertador, the legendary Simón Bolívar, President Chavez dreamed of liberating his country and all Latin America.
Música.
Soon, this would make Chavez a serious thorn in the side of the United States.
Y Venezuela era un abastecedor, sigue siendo un abastecedor, pero en términos de soberanía de Venezuela, de petróleo en Estados Unidos, entonces las posiciones que desde Venezuela viene asumiendo el presidente Chávez, que son en línea contraria totalmente de lo que antes se hacía en el país, hacen ver al presidente Chávez como un enemigo de la filosofía de esas transnacionales.
The The new president had ambitions, building hundreds of schools and thousands of homes, creating agricultural cooperatives, and introducing widespread access to healthcare. The production of 3 million barrels a day and high oil prices enabled the president to spend and spend again. Oil as the fuel of social transformation. In the heart of the barrios of Caracas, this is the Misión Rivas, a social center for the most underprivileged, financed by the National Oil Company. A center for education, health, food aid, and workers' cooperatives. Everything is organized and managed by the people who live in this neighborhood.
Entonces nosotros aquí dirigimos, somos jefas, ¿verdad? Porque aquí no hay un jefe, sino todas nos regimos por la misma ley de cooperativa. Entonces, no tenemos un jefe que nos regañe. Entonces, por lo tanto, nosotros somos dueñas. ¿Y de dónde viene esto? Del petróleo, de los recursos del petróleo, de lo que nos pagan, ¿verdad? Por vender el petróleo. Entonces, ahí tenemos todas esas buenas cosas. Salud, educación, alimentación, yo creo que es para que un pueblo eche adelante.
Confrontation was inevitable. On April 12, 2002, a coup d'etat was organized against Chavez, concocted by oil company executives, supported by the generals, businessmen, and the CIA. The president was arrested, but less than 48 hours later, due to massive public pressure, he was reinstated.
Ellos han tenido una influencia directa, evidentemente. Es lo que se decía en esa época. Cada general costó $100 millones.
Once again, the CIA used its favorite weapons, dollars and manipulation. With widespread public support, Chavez took control of the Venezuelan oil company. 20,000 executives and employees who'd taken part in strikes and sabotage were fired.
You have a president in Venezuela who fancies himself as the reincarnation of Simon Bolivar. And the only thing he does, he takes the money from the oil industry. He doesn't even develop the oil industry. Venezuela produces less oil today than it produced since the first nationalization in the 70s. I mean, it's an absolute, the biggest disaster in the oil business today in the world is in Venezuela. But this guy is popular.
On May 1st, 2007, Chavez occupied the Orinoco oil fields, the last remaining in the hands of the Seven Sisters.
El petróleo de Venezuela es venezolano. La faja petrolífera del Orinoco es íntegramente venezolana. Venezuela es libre. Nuestro petróleo es nuestro. Gracias a la revolución bolivariana. ¡Que viva Venezuela libre! ¡Que viva la revolución!
The oil of the Orinoco is heavy and hard to extract. Chavez needed new technology. Chinese, Russian, and European companies were invited, and they swarmed in. Chavez could smile. Venezuela's reserves are estimated to be some of the biggest on the planet. This time, the American companies lost the battle for Venezuela. A new international diplomacy has emerged around the oil market. Soaring crude prices have reinforced the financial position and influence of oil-producing countries not under Washington's control: Russia, Iran, and Venezuela.
At $100 oil, we have an expression in American English. At $100 oil, Putin and Hugo Chavez are 1,000-pound gorillas, you know, images of King Kong, okay? At $40 oil, they are reduced to chimpanzees, okay? And they will do everything in their power to get the price of oil up to $100. So if we want to convert Chavez and Putin to chimpanzees, it's very simple. Encourage Saudi Aramco to produce more oil, and that would collapse the price of oil to $20, and that would create a hell of a problem for oil-producing countries that right now appear to be stronger than they really are.
April 20th, 2010. In Washington, the President of the United States is expected at the White House for a press conference. America has just suffered its worst ecological disaster. Deepwater Horizon, a BP oil rig, has exploded 80 kilometers off the American coast. 11 people are reported missing. The platform sinks 2 days later. At a depth of almost 4,000 meters, the damaged well spits out some 800 million liters of oil over 106 days. A record spill, with BP and Halliburton seen as responsible. In a restaurant in the heart of Washington's Chinatown, Barack Obama is on the television. He qualifies the catastrophe as an ecological 9/11. The oil companies must pay, and the president announces a moratorium and the suspension of offshore drilling. But after a few months, the moratorium is lifted. Drilling resumes. No one can stop the race for oil. And so the oilmen seek even further afield, in the far north, digging ever more holes. The tar-filled sands of Alberta in Canada represent some of the planet's biggest energy reserves. All the usual suspects are here: Exxon, Chevron, Shell, BP, Total, along with the Chinese CNOC and Sinopec.
Les pétroliers, c'est leur jeu normal, repoussent toujours les limites, tentent de les repousser pour produire toujours plus de pétrole, pour satisfaire des besoins mondiaux croissants en pétrole et pour évidemment des raisons financières, car plus ils produisent et plus ils vendent de pétrole, plus ils gagnent de l'argent et ils sont là pour ça, notamment les compagnies pétrolières privées. Mais il y a des limites en termes de risques politiques, en termes de risques géopolitiques, en termes de conséquences sur l'environnement, sur la sécurité.
The melting ice, due to global warming, is changing the map of the world. A new route is opening up, a northern sea passage, a commercial marine highway linking the markets of Southeast Asia and Europe. Russia has made the Arctic a strategic priority. The fabulous oil and gas reserves supposed to be here are on everyone's wish list. The United States, Canada, Denmark and Norway are all concerned about Russia's ambitious claims.
И мы заинтересованы в развитии Северно-морского пути Арктики, потому что это будущее России. Нефть, газ, алмазы, золото, апатиты, Норильский никель. Все это арктическая зона. А как по-другому?
On August 2nd, 2007, a Russian expedition planted a flag 4,267 meters below the geographic North Pole. A diplomatic bomb, a flag on the seabed, a way of saying to the world, the Arctic is Russian. In order to explore its fields in the Arctic, Russia has allied with the giant BP. The company responsible for the Gulf of Mexico disaster is providing finance, technology, and expertise. For Putin, oil means wealth and power. 25% of the oil imported into Europe is Russian, a precious energy connection that silences many a critical voice. And so the czars, dictators, and monarchs of the world continue to be courted by Paris, Washington, and all the world's capitals. America's former vice president and the former chairman of Halliburton, Dick Cheney, is once said to have remarked, "The good Lord did not see fit to give oil to democracies."
Je crois que pour Dick Cheney, si Dieu n'a pas jugé bon de donner le pétrole à des démocraties, les Américains n'ont pas souhaité vraiment installer des régimes démocratiques dans des États très riches en pétrole. C'est beaucoup plus facile d'exploiter les richesses des autres quand on a la complicité d'un dictateur.
On December 17th, 2010, a young Tunisian burns himself alive, and the fires of revolt are sparked throughout the Arab world. A wall of fear has fallen. A new generation voices its claims for freedom and a share of the oil rights enjoyed by the Gulf's ruling families or established clans. The Arab world rises up, and the whole world trembles. Dictatorships collapse, and monarchies waver. A terrible domino effect. A fire that seems to be raging as far as Saudi Arabia. Could the country known as the world's central oil bank also flare up?
Si un pays comme l'Arabie Saoudite était touché par l'instabilité actuelle, alors personne n'échapperait à la catastrophe. Parce que personne ne peut remplacer le pétrole saoudien. C'est même pas la peine d'y réfléchir. Là, les prix du pétrole s'envoleraient vers des niveaux qu'on n'a jamais vus. Non seulement on souffrirait d'un point de vue économique à cause de l'augmentation du prix, mais on manquerait carrément de pétrole. Ce serait vraiment la pénurie.
In Houston, the world's oil capital, no one in their worst nightmares could imagine serious shortages. The city lives and breathes oil. The Seven Sisters, and almost 1,000 other related companies, all have an address in Houston. Number 800 Bell Avenue, the Exxon building, the cathedral, the Vatican of the oil industry. On the 43rd and 44th floors is the Petroleum Club, the black gold aristocracy. 1,700 members, 500 of whom are dollar billionaires. It's the most exclusive club in the world. For the Petroleum Club at Exxon, it's Christmas every day.
Jingle bells, jingle all the way. Oh, what fun it is to ride in a one-horse open sleigh. Hey, jingle bells, jingle all the way. Oh, what fun it is to ride in a one-horse open sleigh.
Tonight, they're celebrating mergers, mega marriages with mega dowries. Exxon and Chevron are respectively marrying Mobil and Texaco, an American love story. BP ties the knot with Amoco, French Total weds Elf and Fina. The Anglo-Dutch Shell prefers to remain a bachelor. The Seven Sisters have no intention of dying. Once again, unity is strength. Exxon, Shell, Chevron, BP, and Total. Every year, the new quintet publishes record profit reports. Far from the filth of the oil fields, it's on the stock exchange ticker tape that the companies make their fortunes. Oil is the favorite prey of speculators. Every day, oil that doesn't exist is bought and sold.
Le montant des capitaux représentant ces transactions virtuelles sur le marché du pétrole papier est tel. Certains parlent de 5 fois, d'autres parlent de 20 fois le volume des quantités réelles transportées, achetées, vendues, consommées. Cet impact est considérable sur le prix du pétrole lui-même, car le seul caprice des spéculateurs, s'appuyant très souvent sur des formules mathématiques magiques, sur des martingales incroyables, fait varier le prix du pétrole sans rapport avec le jeu de l'offre et de la demande. C'est une des raisons pour laquelle on a vu parfois le prix du baril s'envoler pour des raisons qui n'avaient rien à voir avec le marché.
The sisters have come a long way since the hunting party on the Scottish moors and the infamous night of August 28, 1928, when their cartel was created in absolute secrecy to divide up the world. The 7 voracious sisters. They swore that they would only relinquish their power when the last drop of oil had flowed and the last dollar bill burnt to ashes. They were proud But as the old saying goes, pride goes before a fall.
The Seven Sisters were full with reserve, and they were independent oil companies. International independent oil companies. They did not have any attachment to the governments. Today, they have less reserve. They are dying. Some of them are dying because they are losing the reserve.
The sisters are no longer the only ones with the power, the know-how in the global battle for oil. They're not the only ones who are hungry. Nationalization of oil reserves around the world has ushered in a new generation of oil companies, all vying for a slice of the oil pie. They are the new Seven Sisters. From Saudi Arabia, Saudi Aramco, the largest and most sophisticated oil company in the world. From Russia, Gazprom, a company that Russia's latest Tsar, Vladimir Putin, wrested away from the oligarchs. The China National Petroleum Corporation, or CNPC, which along with its subsidiary PetroChina, is the world's second largest company in terms of market value. The National Iranian Oil Company, which has a monopoly on exploration, extraction, and transportation of crude oil in Iran, OPEC's second largest oil producer after Saudi Arabia. Venezuela's PDVSA, a company the late President Hugo Chavez dismantled and rebuilt into his country's economic engine and part of his diplomatic arsenal. Brazil's Petrobras, a leader in deep water oil production that pumps out 2 million barrels of crude a day. And from Malaysia, Petronas, Asia's most profitable company in 2012. Mainly state-owned, the new Seven Sisters control a third of the world's oil and gas production and more than a third of the world's reserves. The old Seven Sisters, by comparison, produce a tenth of the world's oil and control only 3% of the reserves. The balance has shifted.
They have to struggle to build up more reserve. That's I agree with you. But however, the core of the Seven Sisters will remain there because they have the technology and they know they have the know-how. So it's going to be a new ball game.
A new ball game with new players. Something that perhaps the old Seven Sisters hadn't counted on. They've pillaged the world for almost a century and left poverty, war, and misery in their wake. In the suburbs of Houston, we meet Juan Paras and his son, the last watchman over the world's biggest oil refinery.
We all have dreams, and one of our dreams also would be to take the CEOs of ExxonMobil, of Shell, of BP, of Chevron, ConocoPhillips, any of those industries, Valero. We would love to take them on a toxic tour and show them the living conditions that people along their fence line live, just to show them, look, what are you doing for the communities? I know you're doing a lot for your shareholders. You know, you care about the profits, you care about your sales, you care about your productions. But every time the productions go down, you know who pays the price for it? The community does. And even when the productions are high, who pays the price for it? The community does.
As night falls over Houston, smoke continues to rise from its Goliath refineries. Here, our journey through the story of the Seven Sisters comes to an end. But the toxic reality of that story continues to linger.